Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that would have gotten you burned at the stake, excommunicated, or at minimum aggressively gossiped about at the village well. Women who lived alone without a man in medieval and early modern Europe. Not the fairy tale kind. Not the independent woman, Instagram aesthetic. I'm talking about the real, actual women who dared to exist without a husband, father or brother to vouch for them. Women who were instantly suspicious, probably cursed, and definitely up to something involving cats and herbs. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum and get comfortable. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it was actually like to be a woman living alone in a time when that was basically a crime against nature? How did you pay rent when women weren't allowed to own property? What did your neighbours think you were doing in there? Witchcraft, obviously, but what kind? Did every unexplained illness in town become your fault? Could you survive constant surveillance, zero legal protection, and the knowledge that one bad rumour could get you drowned in a river? Would you last a week before the village priest showed up asking pointed questions about your marital status and suspiciously good vegetable garden? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in 1425. You're a single woman living alone in a small cottage on the edge of town. You have no husband, no father, and the entire community thinks you're either a saint or a witch. There is no in-between. Good luck. Let's start with where you live. Because in medieval Europe, a woman living alone didn't get a cute studio apartment with exposed brick and good natural light. You got a cottage. And not the charming kind. Your home is small, drafty, and positioned just far enough from the village centre that people can whisper about you without raising their voices. The location isn't an accident. Respectable women lived near family, near the church, near witnesses. You're out here on the margin, literally and figuratively, in a structure made of wattle and daub that leaks when it rains and smells perpetually of smoke, damp wool, and whatever you're drying from the garden. The neighbours watch your chimney. They count how many candles you light. They notice when you're awake at odd hours. Because a woman alone isn't just unusual, she's a question mark, and question marks make people nervous. The cottage itself is what we might generously call rustic. The walls are woven sticks plastered with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. Yes, dung. It's actually a decent insulator when it dries, and it's free if you know where to find it. The roof is thatched, layers of dried reeds or straw bundled together and laid over wooden beams. When it's new, it keeps the rain out. When it's old, which yours definitely is, it drips. Constantly. You've learned to position your bed, your cooking pot, and your one wooden stool in the few spots that stay relatively dry. During heavy storms, you just accept that you're going to get wet and try to keep the fire from going out. Speaking of fire, your hearth is the centerpiece of your entire existence. It's a shallow pit in the middle of the dirt floor, ringed with stones to keep the flames contained. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that lets some of the smoke escape. Some of it. The rest just hangs in the air, stinging your eyes and coating everything in a thin layer of soot. Your clothes smell like smoke. Your hair smells like smoke. Your skin tastes like smoke. Visitors, on the rare occasion you have any, can tell you're poor before they even see you, just from the smell. The floor is packed earth. No wooden planks, no stone tiles, just dirt that's been walked on so many times it's hard as rock. When it rains, water seeps up from below, turning patches into mud. You've scattered rushes and straw across it to create the illusion of a floor covering, but mostly you've just created a breeding ground for fleas, mice, and things you'd rather not identify. Every few months, you're supposed to sweep out the old rushes and lay fresh ones, but fresh rushes cost money or time you don't have, so you make do with what's there, occasionally kicking the worst bits into the fire. Your furniture situation is bleak. You have a bed, technically. It's a wooden frame with rope strung across it to support a mattress, which is really just a sack stuffed with straw. The straw needs replacing regularly because it compresses, gets damp, and starts to smell like decay. But fresh straw costs money, so you've learned to fluff what you have and pretend it's fine. You also have one stool, hand-carved and wobbly, a small table, more of a plank balanced on two supports, a few shelves nailed crookedly to the wall where you keep your cooking pot, wooden bowl, spoon, and the 3 other possessions you own. Storage is a constant problem. You need to keep your food away from rodents, which is basically impossible in a medieval cottage. You hang things from the rafters, onions, herbs, dried fish if you're lucky, but mice can climb, and rats are basically tiny acrobats. You store grain in ceramic pots sealed with wax, but sometimes the wax cracks, and you discover an entire family of mice has moved in and started a colony. It's like living in a nature documentary, except you're also starring in a tragedy about poverty. Light is another issue. During the day you have one small window, an opening cut into the wall, covered with oiled linen or animal skin to let in light while keeping out some of the weather. It's not glass. Glass is for rich people and churches. Your window covering is translucent at best, so the interior of your cottage exists in a permanent state of gloom. On overcast days, it's like living inside a cave. At night, you have 2 options: firelight or candles. Candles are expensive, made from tallow or beeswax, and you can't afford to burn them casually. So most nights, you sit by the fire, trying to finish your work before the light dies completely. Privacy is a joke. Your walls are thin enough that you can hear your nearest neighbour coughing. They can definitely hear you moving around, talking to yourself, or doing anything else that might seem suspicious. The door is wooden, held shut by a simple latch. There's no lock. If someone wanted to come in while you were sleeping, they could. You've wedged a stool against the door at night, not because it would actually stop anyone, but because at least you'd hear it scrape across the floor and have a few seconds of warning. The whole cottage is maybe 15 feet by 15 feet. One room. That's it. You sleep here, cook here, eat here, work here, and occasionally cry here when the weight of it all becomes too much. There's no bathroom. That's the bucket in the corner or a trip outside to the designated spot behind the cottage. There's no separation between living space and workspace. Your spinning wheel, if you have one, sits next to your bed. Your loom, if you're a weaver, takes up half the room. Everything overlaps. Everything smells like everything else, and there's no escape. And yet, this cottage, miserable as it is yours. Sort of. You're probably renting it from the local lord or a landowner, paying a few pennies a month or a portion of whatever you manage to grow or produce. If you fall behind on payments, you're out. If the lord decides he wants the land for something else, you're out. If you die, your possessions get claimed by whoever has the legal right, which isn't you. But for now, in this moment, it's the closest thing you have to security. The location, as mentioned, is strategic. You're close enough to the village to access the well, the church, and the market, but far enough away that your presence doesn't contaminate the respectable households. You're near the forest, which is useful for gathering firewood, mushrooms, and medicinal herbs, but also means you're closer to danger, bandits, wild animals, and the general lawlessness that exists beyond the village boundary. Some women living alone positioned themselves near roads, hoping that proximity to travellers might offer protection, or at least witnesses. Others hid themselves away completely, preferring isolation to scrutiny. Your cottage doesn't have a garden in the way modern people think of gardens. You have a small plot of land, maybe 20 feet square, where you grow whatever will keep you alive. Onions, leeks, cabbage, turnips, beans if you're lucky. A few herbs, thyme, rosemary, sage, for cooking and for the folk medicine you're quietly learning. Maybe a couple of scraggly hens scratching around in the dirt if you can afford to feed them and keep them from being stolen. This plot is simultaneously your grocery store, your pharmacy, and your insurance policy. If the crops fail, you starve. If someone tramples your garden or your chickens disappear, you're in serious trouble. The funny thing is, despite how grim all this sounds, you've probably tried to make it bearable. Maybe you've hung a bunch of dried flowers above the door, not because they're pretty, but because they might ward off evil or at least make the place smell slightly less like medieval poverty. Maybe you've scratched a small cross into the doorframe, a quiet prayer in wood. Maybe you've arranged your few possessions with care, creating the illusion of order in a life that feels like it's constantly on the edge of chaos. And every night, you bar the door, bank the fire, and lie down on your straw mattress in your smoky, leaky, mouse-infested cottage on the edge of the village. You listen to the wind whistling through gaps in the walls. You think about the neighbours watching your chimney. You wonder if tomorrow will be the day someone decides you've been alone too long, that your independence has crossed some invisible line into suspicion. Because in medieval Europe, a woman living alone in a cottage wasn't just unconventional, she was a threat, and your home, marginal as it was, marked you as dangerous. Here's the thing about being a woman alone in medieval society. You're not supposed to exist. The entire social structure is built on the assumption that every woman belongs to a man, father, husband, brother, even a grown son. These men are your legal representatives, your protection, your voice in any official matter. Without one, you're what they called a femme sole, a woman alone, which sounds empowering until you realise it mostly means legal nightmare. You can't testify in most courts, you can't own property in many regions, you can't enter contracts without a male guarantor, and if something goes wrong, if you're robbed, assaulted or cheated, good luck getting justice. The system assumes you're either lying, hysterical, or somehow brought it on yourself. Your marital status isn't just personal, it's political, legal, and deeply, deeply suspicious. The medieval worldview operates on a simple principle. Women are incomplete without men, not metaphorically, literally. The prevailing theology, backed by everyone from Aristotle to the Church Fathers, holds that women are defective versions of men, weaker in body, feebler in mind, and dangerously susceptible to sin. Eve's whole apple situation really did a number on your reputation for the next 1,000+ years. The solution, according to medieval logic, is that women need to be guided, controlled, and represented by men at all times. It's for your own good, they say. It's God's design, they insist. It's definitely not about consolidating power and property in male hands. Definitely not. This belief system manifests in every aspect of medieval law. In England, under the system of coverture, married women are legally covered by their husbands. They can't own property separately. They can't make contracts. They can't sue or be sued. Everything they own becomes their husband's property the moment they marry. Their legal identity is essentially absorbed. A married woman and her husband are considered one person in the eyes of the law, and that person is the husband. Even their children belong to the father, not the mother. If he dies, guardianship of the children might go to his male relatives, not to you. Romantic, right? But at least married women have some defined place in the social order. You, as a woman alone, exist in a much stranger legal limbo. Technically, in some regions, you do have slightly more legal capacity than a married woman. You can own property in your own name, if you manage to acquire any. You can enter into contracts, make a will, and conduct business, theoretically. The problem is that every single one of these rights is conditional, limited by local custom, and subject to challenge by literally any man who decides you're overstepping. Let's say you inherit a small plot of land from your late husband. Congratulations. Now watch as his male relatives immediately contest the inheritance, claiming that as a woman you're not capable of managing property properly. They'll argue that the land should pass to a male heir, even a distant cousin, rather than remain in your defective female hands. You can fight this in court, but you'll need to hire a male lawyer to represent you, which costs money you don't have, and the judge is definitely a man who probably agrees that women shouldn't own land anyway. Want to enter a contract to sell some wool you've spun? Sure, but if the buyer decides not to pay you, your options for enforcement are limited. You can bring a case to the local court, but you might not be allowed to testify on your own behalf. Instead, you'll need male witnesses to testify for you, which means you need men who are willing to get involved in your business and vouch for your version of events. Good luck finding that when most men don't want to be associated with a woman of questionable reputation, and if the dispute involves anything substantial, the other party can simply challenge your competence as a woman, and suddenly the whole case becomes about whether you're trustworthy rather than whether they owe you money. The tax situation is its own special nightmare. You still have to pay taxes on your cottage, on your tiny plot of land, on any goods you sell. But when the tax collector comes around, you're negotiating with a man who knows you have no male protector. Some collectors are honest. Others see an opportunity. They might inflate what you owe, knowing you can't effectively challenge them. They might suggest alternative payment arrangements that make your skin crawl, and if you refuse or can't pay, they can seize your property, evict you, or have you thrown in debtor's prison. Your lack of a male advocate makes you vulnerable to every petty official with a little bit of power and no conscience. Then there's the question of physical protection, which in medieval society is closely tied to legal status. In the feudal system, protection flows down from the lord to his vassals, from husbands to wives, from fathers to daughters. It's a pyramid of dominance disguised as security. Without a place in this pyramid, you're unprotected in both the legal and physical sense. If someone attacks you, there's no man whose honour is offended, no family to demand compensation or revenge. You're on your own, and the law knows it. The concept of appeal, of rape, existed in medieval England, a legal action where a woman could bring a case of rape before the court. But the requirements were absurd. You had to raise the hue and cry immediately after the assault, gathering witnesses while you were still traumatised. You had to show visible signs of injury and resistance, because if you didn't fight back hard enough, clearly you consented. You had to name your attacker publicly, which meant accusing someone who likely had more social standing than you. And if your case failed, you could be punished for making a false accusation. Most women didn't bother. The legal system wasn't designed to protect you. It was designed to maintain order, and your violation didn't threaten order enough to matter. Inheritance laws are another maze of discrimination. If you have children from your marriage, your son will inherit property, but your daughter might only receive a dowry portion, if anything. If you die without children, your property goes to your late husband's family, not your birth family. If you die without ever having married, your property might go to the lord as a feudal due, or to the church, or to your nearest male relative who can prove a claim. The law is specifically designed to prevent property from accumulating in female hands. Women are seen as temporary custodians at best, and more often as obstacles to proper male inheritance. Your ability to work is also legally constrained. Many guilds, the medieval equivalent of professional organisations, explicitly bar women from membership. You can't become a master craftsperson in most trades. You can't take on apprentices. You can't access the professional networks that men use to secure good work and fair prices. Some guilds make exceptions for widows of guild members, allowing them to continue their husband's business for a limited time, but even this is grudging and conditional. The assumption is always that a woman working is a temporary aberration, something to be tolerated briefly and then corrected when she remarries or dies. There's also the problem of documentation. Most official records from this period were kept by men, priests, scribes, clerks, officials, and they didn't always bother to record women's names, especially unmarried or widowed women. You might appear in records as the widow Smith, or Jane, alone, a description rather than a full legal identity. This makes you easier to erase, easier to ignore, easier to cheat. If there's a dispute about whether you paid your taxes or fulfilled a contract, and there's no clear record with your name on it, good luck proving your case. The church adds another layer of control. Canon law governs marriage, and the church has opinions about women living alone. They're not fans. An unmarried woman is a temptation to sin, her own and others. A widow is expected to remain chaste and pious, ideally remarrying quickly or retreating into religious life. If you're doing neither, the church views you with suspicion. Priests give sermons about the dangers of female independence. They suggest that women alone are vulnerable to the devil's influence. They strongly encourage you to place yourself under male authority for the good of your soul. Some cities had specific ordinances about single women. In London, there were laws requiring that unmarried women live with family or in respectable households, not alone. In Paris, regulations controlled where single women could live and what hours they could be out. Some towns required single women to register with authorities and provide regular proof of respectable employment. The state, like the church, saw female independence as something to be monitored, limited, and ideally eliminated. The psychological weight of all this is crushing. You're constantly aware that you exist outside the proper order of things. Every interaction with authority is fraught. Every legal transaction requires you to perform deference and humility to compensate for the fact that you're anomalous. You can't be confident or assertive without being labelled difficult or unwomanly. You can't advocate for yourself without confirming everyone's suspicion that you're the wrong kind of woman. And here's the cruelest irony. The system that claims you need male protection is the same system that makes you vulnerable in the first place. You need a man to represent you in court because the court won't listen to women. You need a husband to protect you because unmarried women are seen as available targets. The solution to the problems created by patriarchy is, apparently, more patriarchy. It's like being told you need to hire a guard to protect you from the guards. So no, being a femme soul is not empowering. It's surviving in a legal system designed to erase you, with one hand tied behind your back and everyone watching to see when you'll fail. So how does a woman end up living alone in a world designed to prevent exactly that? The most common route: widowhood. Your husband died, and you didn't remarry. Maybe you were too old, too poor, or too stubborn. Maybe you had children to protect or a business to run. Widows had slightly more legal standing than single women, but that standing came with expectations. You were supposed to be pious, modest, and preferably invisible. Another path: you never married at all. Maybe your family couldn't afford a dowry. Maybe you refused the match they arranged. Maybe you were too sick, too strange, or too smart, and no one wanted to deal with you. Or perhaps, and this was rarest and most dangerous, you ran away from an abusive marriage, a controlling father, a life you couldn't survive. These women existed in the cracks, and history barely remembers them. Let's start with widowhood, because it's the most socially acceptable way to end up alone, which tells you something about medieval priorities. Your husband is dead. Maybe he died in a farming accident, crushed by a cart, gored by an ox, or just worked himself into an early grave by age 35. Maybe he got sick during one of the countless epidemics that swept through medieval Europe like clockwork. Maybe he went off to war, or on a pilgrimage, or just wandered away one day and never came back. However it happened, you're now a widow, and society has opinions about what you should do next. The expectation is that you'll remarry quickly, not because anyone cares about your happiness, but because an unmarried woman is a problem that needs solving. If you're young and childless, you're expected to remarry within a year, maybe sooner. Your late husband's family might even have a replacement picked out already. A brother, a cousin, someone who can keep the property in the family. If you're older, past childbearing age, the pressure is slightly less intense, but it's still there. Remarriage means you're someone else's responsibility, someone else's legal dependent, and that makes everyone more comfortable. But maybe you don't remarry. Maybe you're 45 and exhausted, and the thought of serving another husband makes you want to walk into the forest and never come back. Maybe you have children from your first marriage, and you know that a new husband will prioritize his own interests over theirs. Maybe you inherited a small business, a bakery, a brewery, a weaving operation, and you're determined to keep it running yourself. Or maybe, and this is the part nobody says out loud, your first marriage was so terrible that you'd rather risk poverty and social stigma than ever let another man control your life. Widowhood gives you a tiny window of autonomy, and some women grab it with both hands. You're legally recognised in ways that single women aren't. You can own property, you can run a business, you can make contracts. You have a legitimate reason for existing outside male guardianship. Your guardian died, and you haven't acquired a new one yet. It's temporary independence, grudgingly granted, but it's something. Some widows manage to hold on to this status for years, even decades, navigating the constant pressure to remarry with a combination of excuses, delays, and sheer stubbornness. Then there's the path of never marrying at all, which is less common but not unheard of. Marriage in medieval Europe isn't primarily about love, it's an economic transaction. Your family is supposed to provide a dowry, a financial gift that goes to your husband and compensates him for taking on the burden of supporting you. If your family is poor, scraping together a dowry might be impossible. Your father might have multiple daughters and only enough resources to marry off one or two of them. The others just remain unmarried, living with family as permanent dependents, or striking out on their own if they can find work. Some women refused marriage outright, which was an act of rebellion so radical that most people couldn't comprehend it. Maybe the match your family arranged was with a man twice your age who already buried 2 wives. Maybe your prospective husband was known to be violent, cruel, or diseased. Maybe you looked at the married women around you, exhausted, pregnant, bruised, voiceless, and thought, "No thank you, I'll take my chances alone." Refusing marriage meant losing your family's support. It meant poverty. It meant social stigma. But for some women, it was still preferable to the alternative. Physical or mental illness could also keep you unmarried. If you were disabled, chronically ill, or what medieval people called simple-minded, you might be considered unmarriageable. No one wanted to take on a wife who couldn't work, bear children, or manage a household, so you remained with your family if they kept you, or ended up in a marginal existence if they didn't. Medieval society wasn't kind to anyone who couldn't perform economically, and disabled women living alone faced particular vulnerability. Then there's the darkest path, running away. This is the story that doesn't appear in official records because it's illegal, scandalous, and dangerous. You're married to a man who beats you unconscious regularly, or your father is arranging your marriage to his creditor to settle a debt, and you're 14 years old, or you're trapped in a household where you're being sexually abused, and no one will help you because family honour matters more than your safety. So one night, you take the few things you can carry and you run. Where do you go? Not far, usually, because medieval people don't travel much and strangers are suspicious. Maybe you make it to the nearest town and try to disappear into the urban poor. Maybe you attach yourself to a group of pilgrims and hope no one asks too many questions. Maybe you find work as a servant in a household far enough away that your family can't easily retrieve you. You change your name. You invent a backstory. You're a widow. Your husband died of plague. You have no living relatives. You hope no one digs too deep. The legal situation for runaways is grim. If you're married and you leave your husband, he has the legal right to hunt you down and bring you back. The church considers you a disobedient wife, and disobedience is a sin. If you're an unmarried daughter who fled your father's household, he can demand your return, and the authorities will usually side with him. You're considered stolen property, essentially, and returning you is a matter of restoring proper order. Some women managed to evade capture by moving frequently, by finding communities that asked fewer questions, or by creating new identities so convincing that their past couldn't find them. A few women found refuge in religious communities. Becoming a nun required a dowry too, but some convents accepted poorer women as lay sisters, servants who lived within the convent but didn't take full vows. It wasn't freedom exactly. You traded one set of rules for another, but it offered safety, stability, and a legitimate reason to remain unmarried. Some women joined informal religious communities called beguinages, particularly common in the Low Countries, where women lived together in semi-religious arrangements without taking permanent vows. These communities gave women autonomy, education, and economic cooperation. Of course, the church was suspicious of them, and they were periodically investigated for heresy. Sometimes women ended up alone simply because everyone else died. Plague, warfare, famine. Medieval Europe offered no shortage of ways to lose your entire family. Maybe you were the only one who survived the epidemic that tore through your village. Maybe your parents died when you were young, and your siblings scattered. Maybe you had no siblings, and your parents died without arranging a marriage for you. You're left with nothing but yourself, and whatever survival skills you've managed to pick up along the way. The economic crashes and social upheavals of the medieval period also created displaced women. The Black Death killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's population in some regions, disrupting social structures and creating a surplus of unmarried women and widows. Wars displaced populations, destroyed property, and killed men faster than they killed women, leaving survivors to fend for themselves. Poor harvests and famines pushed people off the land and into towns, where traditional family structures broke down, and women sometimes found themselves isolated and struggling. Here's what all these paths have in common. They're hard. There's no easy way to end up as a woman living alone in medieval Europe. Every route involves loss of a husband, of family support, of social standing, of the life you thought you'd have, and every route leaves you vulnerable because you've stepped outside the structures designed to contain you. You're a glitch in the social matrix, an anomaly that makes people uncomfortable, and they will spend considerable energy trying to either fix you or erase you. And yet, you're here. However you arrived at this point, through widowhood, refusal, escape, or sheer accident of survival, you've ended up in this drafty cottage on the edge of the village alone. You wake up every morning knowing that your existence is considered unnatural, that you're one accusation away from total ruin, and that nobody's coming to save you because the people who were supposed to protect you are dead, gone, or the reason you're here in the first place. Your backstory isn't romantic. It's not empowering. It's survival carved out of limited options, and every day you continue to survive is its own quiet act of defiance. You didn't choose this life because it was good. You chose it, or it chose you, because the alternatives were worse. And now you're stuck with it, making it work one exhausting day at a time, knowing that the world would prefer you didn't exist at all. Privacy is not a thing you have. Your cottage might have walls, but those walls are basically made of gossip-conducting material. Every morning someone notices whether your door opens. Every evening someone marks whether you light a candle. If you go to the well, they watch who you talk to. If you don't go to the well, they wonder what you're hiding. The village operates on an economy of surveillance where reputation is currency, and women alone are permanently overdrafted. Your neighbours aren't just nosy, they're your informal regulators. They enforce the rules because the rules keep society orderly, and a woman without a man is disorder incarnate. She might be stealing, she might be sinning. She might be spreading disease or bad luck or feminist ideas, so they watch, they whisper, and they wait for you to slip up. Let's start with the physical reality of medieval village life, because it's designed for maximum visibility. Houses are clustered together, often sharing walls or separated by narrow lanes barely wide enough for a cart. Your cottage might be slightly removed, but not far enough to escape scrutiny. The village layout ensures that everyone can see everyone else's business. There are no privacy fences, no tall hedges, no good fences make good neighbours philosophy. Just open sight lines, and a collective understanding that monitoring each other is part of community membership. The well is ground zero for surveillance, is where women gather daily to draw water, and it's also where information gets exchanged faster than coins at market. You can't avoid the well. You need water to cook, clean and survive, but every trip is a performance. You walk there in the morning, bucket in hand, trying to look neither too proud nor too humble. Too proud, and they'll say you're putting on airs, forgetting your place as a woman alone who should be grateful for whatever scraps of charity come your way. Too humble, and they'll smell desperation and circle like sharks. At the well, conversations happen around you, not always with you. "Good morning, Margaret," someone might say, her tone carefully neutral. You respond politely, draw your water and try not to linger. But as you walk away, you can feel the conversation resume behind you. "Did you see her hands? Covered in dirt, like she's been digging. At night, probably. I heard movement from her cottage after dark. What could she be doing at that hour?" The speculation spreads like dye in water, subtle but pervasive. By evening, half the village will have heard that you were digging something up at midnight, and by the next day, someone will swear they saw you burying something by moonlight. Your chimney smoke is another surveillance point. In the morning, neighbours note when your fire starts. Start it too early and you're wasteful or you couldn't sleep, guilty conscience perhaps. Start it too late and you're lazy or unwell, suspicious either way. The amount of smoke matters too. Too much smoke suggests you're cooking something elaborate. Where did you get the food? Did you steal it? Is someone visiting you and providing provisions in exchange for unsavoury favours? Too little smoke suggests you're going without, which means you're probably desperate, which means you're probably about to do something desperate. The candles at night are tracked with obsessive detail. Light in your window after dark prompts questions. Are you working late? On what? Are you reading? That's suspicious. Women who read are usually up to something. Are you entertaining a visitor? Who? When did they arrive and when will they leave? Some neighbours will actually count the hours your candle burns, mentally calculating how much tallow you must be using and comparing it to your apparent income. If the numbers don't add up, clearly you're getting resources from somewhere illicit. Your comings and goings are logged like a medieval timesheet. If you leave your cottage at an unusual hour, someone notes it. Where's she going before dawn? Who goes to market on a Thursday? She's walking toward the forest again, third time this week. Every deviation from routine becomes evidence of something, and if you try to maintain a very regular routine to avoid suspicion, that becomes suspicious too. She's too predictable, like she's trying to establish an alibi. You cannot win this game. The game is designed to be unwinnable. The other women are often your harshest judges. It's not because they're inherently cruel, it's because they're protecting their own reputations by creating distance between themselves and you. A married woman with a respectable household can't be seen as too friendly with a woman alone, especially one whose circumstances are questionable. It might suggest that she sympathises with female independence, which could make her husband suspicious. it might taint her reputation by association. So these women maintain a careful distance. Cordial, but cold. Helpful in emergencies, but never warm. They watch what you wear. If your dress is too nice, you're vain, and probably using money that should go to the church or the poor. If your dress is too worn, you're slovenly, and bringing shame to the village. If you mend it too well, you have too much time on your hands. If you don't mend it, you're letting yourself go. Your hair covering is scrutinized. Is it modest enough? Too modest. Are you trying to look like a nun to hide your sins? Not modest enough. You're clearly advertising your availability to men. They monitor your food. At market, vendors notice what you buy and report it in casual conversation. She bought eggs today. Where's she getting the money? She didn't buy bread. Must be making her own. But with what grain? If you have a good week and buy a bit of meat, it becomes news. Mutton. Where did she get the coin for mutton? The assumption is always that you couldn't have earned it legitimately. Maybe you stole it. Maybe you're prostituting yourself. Maybe you're practicing witchcraft and someone paid you for a curse or a love potion. Your visitors are tracked with military precision. If anyone approaches your cottage, multiple people note it. A man visiting you is automatically scandalous unless he's a priest. And even then, people might whisper about whether his visit was purely spiritual. A woman visiting you is less scandalous, but still noted. Is she buying something from you? Are you forming an alliance? Are you gossiping about other villagers? If someone delivers something to your door, firewood, bread, a basket of vegetables, people want to know why. Is it charity? Is it payment for services? What kind of services? The church adds an official layer to the informal surveillance. The priest keeps track of who attends Mass, who confesses regularly, who takes communion. If you miss a service, he might visit your cottage to ask why. If you attend but seem distracted or emotional, he'll want to know what's troubling you. Your spiritual life is monitored as carefully as your physical one, because the two are considered inseparable. A woman who's straying from the church is probably straying in other ways too. Children are weaponized as spies, though they don't realize it. Kids are everywhere in medieval villages, running between houses, playing in lanes, watching everything with wide eyes and zero filter. They'll report what they see to their parents without understanding the implications. Mother, the woman in the cottage was talking to herself. Father, I saw her garden has more vegetables than ours. Is she a better farmer? These innocent observations become data points in the village's collective surveillance file on you. Even your animals are scrutinized. If your chickens are laying well, people wonder if you're using magic to encourage them. If they're not laying, clearly you're cursed, or you're not caring for them properly. If your goat gives good milk, you must be feeding it something special. What, and where did you get it? If your cat seems particularly healthy and affectionate, it's probably your familiar, a demonic spirit in animal form sent to help you with witchcraft. The worst part is that this surveillance is considered normal, even virtuous. Your neighbours aren't ashamed of watching you. They consider it their duty. They're maintaining community standards, protecting the village from moral contamination, and ensuring that everyone stays in their proper place. They would be horrified if you accused them of harassment or invasion of privacy, because in their minds, privacy is something you forfeited when you chose to live outside the proper social structure, and you can't confront them. If you march up to someone and say, "Stop watching my cottage and spreading rumours," you've just confirmed that you're difficult, aggressive, and definitely hiding something. The surveillance continues, and now you've added confrontational to your growing list of suspicious qualities. If you try to be friendly and open, sharing information about your life to preempt speculation, they'll take that information and twist it anyway. She's too eager to explain herself. Very suspicious. Some women tried to use the surveillance to their advantage, performing visible piety and virtue in hopes of improving their reputations. They'd ostentatiously carry their prayer book to church. They'd make a show of giving to beggars. They'd speak loudly about their devotion to God and their chaste, pure life. Sometimes this worked, at least temporarily. But it was exhausting, like being on trial every moment of every day, and one slip could undo months of careful performance. The psychological toll is immense. You internalize the surveillance. You start monitoring yourself the way your neighbours monitor you. Before you do anything, you ask yourself, how will this look? Who will see? What will they think? You become hyper-aware of every action, every choice, every moment of your life. You can't relax. You can't let your guard down. Even in your own cottage, in the dark, you wonder if someone is listening at the wall or watching for the shadow of a movement across your window covering. This is what it means to live as a woman alone in a medieval village. You exist in a panopticon of judgment, where the watchtower is every doorway, every window, every pair of eyes, and the guards never sleep, never rest, and never forget. They're always watching, always waiting for you to prove them right about what you really are, a woman who shouldn't exist. Now let's talk about money, because you need it, and getting it as a single woman is like playing a game where all the rules are designed to make you lose. Most professions are closed to women. Guilds won't accept you. Apprenticeships are for boys. Land ownership requires a male heir. So what's left? Spinning, weaving, washing other people's linens in cold water until your hands crack and bleed. Brewing ale, which is actually one of the few respected trades for women, until it becomes profitable, at which point men take it over and suddenly you're a witch for doing the exact same thing. You might take in sewing, mending, or piecework for wealthier households. You might sell eggs, herbs, or vegetables from your garden. You might do wet nursing, midwifery, or caretaking, all of which pay poorly and come with high risk. Every coin is a small miracle. Every meal is a negotiation with survival. Let's start with spinning, because if you're a woman in medieval Europe, someone at some point has definitely suggested you take up spinning. It's considered appropriate women's work, domestic, modest, done at home where you can't cause trouble. The term spinster literally comes from this occupation. You sit with a distaff and spindle, twisting raw wool or flax into thread for hours on end until your fingers are numb and your back is screaming. The work is tedious, repetitive, and pays almost nothing. You might spin for an entire day and earn enough to buy a loaf of bread. Maybe. If the person buying your thread feels generous and doesn't haggle you down to nothing because they know you're desperate. The spinning wheel, which would eventually make the work slightly less painful, is just starting to appear in some regions during the medieval period, but it's expensive. You don't own one. You're using the drop spindle, a stick with a weight on the end that you have to keep twisting and dropping and catching over and over for hours. It's like the universe's worst repetitive motion injury waiting to happen. Your hands develop calluses in strange places, your wrists ache constantly, and at the end of the week you have thread to sell, which you'll take to market in exchange for a handful of coins that won't be enough. Weaving is slightly more lucrative, but it requires a loom, which is a significant investment you probably can't afford. Some women inherited looms from husbands or fathers. Others saved for years to buy one. The loom takes up half your cottage, but it's worth it because woven cloth sells for more than thread. You can make simple wool fabric, linen if you're skilled, maybe even some basic patterns if you're very good. But here's the problem. Weaving is also one of those trades that's increasingly controlled by guilds, and guilds don't like women. If you're a widow continuing your husband's weaving business, they might tolerate you temporarily. If you're a woman who learned weaving independently, they'll find ways to block you from the best markets and customers. Laundry is another option, and by option, I mean back-breaking nightmare work that destroys your body for minimal pay. You haul water from the well or the river, multiple trips because wet laundry is heavy and you need a lot of water. You heat it over your fire if you can afford the fuel. You scrub linens with lye soap that burns your skin and eats through any cuts or cracks in your hands. You pound the fabric against rocks or wooden boards to get stains out. You wring everything by hand, which requires surprising strength and leaves your arms trembling. Then you hang it to dry, hoping it doesn't rain, get stolen, or get dirty again before your customer collects it. For all this labour, you earn maybe a few pennies per load. Wealthy households might pay slightly more, but they're also more demanding about getting stains out of expensive fabrics. One mistake, shrinking a wool garment, leaving a stain, losing a piece, and you're not getting paid. You might even be charged for the damage, and in winter, when water is freezing and your hands are already cracked and bleeding from the cold, laundry work becomes a form of torture. But you do it anyway because you need the money. Brewing ale is one of the few trades where women historically dominated, at least initially. Brewing was considered an extension of cooking and baking, domestic work that women did at home to feed their families. Many women brewed extra ale to sell, and it was a legitimate, respectable way to earn income. You'd hang an ale stake, a pole with a bush or wreath on the end, outside your cottage to signal that you had ale for sale. Neighbours would stop by, sample your brew, and buy jugs of it. But here's where it gets interesting in a horrible way. As brewing became more profitable, particularly in urban areas where demand was high, men started taking over the trade. Guilds formed, regulations appeared. Suddenly, brewing required licenses, official inspections, and guild membership, all things that mysteriously became harder for women to obtain. And women who continued brewing independently, especially women living alone, started getting accused of witchcraft. That image of a witch stirring a cauldron, that's literally just a woman brewing ale. The pointed hat, that's an ale stake, the sign that she had beer for sale. The cat, probably just keeping mice away from the grain. But men wanted control of the profitable ale trade, and accusing independent female brewers of witchcraft was an effective way to eliminate the competition. Sewing and mending is another survival option. Wealthy households always need clothes repaired, altered, or embellished. You might take in piecework, hemming tunics, mending torn seams, adding embroidery to sleeves. If you're skilled with a needle, you can do finer work, embroidering religious vestments, creating decorative pieces for the church, stitching delicate patterns on noble women's gowns. This work pays better than spinning, but it requires good eyesight, steady hands, and often working by candlelight, which costs money and ruins your eyes faster. The problem with needlework is that you're competing with every other woman who knows how to sew, which is most women. The market is oversaturated and customers know it. They'll haggle relentlessly because they know you need the work more than they need your specific services. "I can get this hemmed down the lane for half the price," they'll say, and you'll drop your rate because you can't afford to lose the work. You're not building a thriving seamstress business. You're barely keeping yourself fed. Growing and selling produce is viable if you have land and decent soil. Your small garden plot can produce onions, leeks, cabbages, beans, herbs, things you can eat yourself or sell at market. If you have chickens, you can sell eggs, though you'll eat most of them yourself because protein is scarce and precious. The problem is that farming is hard, unpredictable work. Weather can destroy your crops, pests can eat them before you do, blight can wipe out your entire cabbage harvest. And you're farming a tiny plot with hand tools, no oxen, no help. Every harvest is uncertain. At market, you'll sit with your basket of vegetables or eggs, competing with dozens of other small-scale sellers. Customers will pick through your produce, rejecting anything that's not perfect. They'll offer insultingly low prices. This cabbage has wormholes. These eggs are small. You'll negotiate, compromise, and eventually sell what you can for less than it's worth, because bringing it home unsold means it rots and you've earned nothing. Midwifery is skilled work that's desperately needed, but it's also incredibly risky. You're called to births at all hours, in all weather. You arrive at a cottage where a woman is in labour, often in terrible conditions, cold, dirty, no privacy, no proper supplies. You do your best with clean hands, warm water if you can get it, and centuries of women's knowledge passed down about positioning, breathing, and when to intervene. When everything goes well, mother and baby survive, and you're paid a small fee. Maybe some bread, some cheese, a few coins if the family can afford it. But when things go wrong, and they often do, you're blamed. If the baby dies, you did something wrong. If the mother dies, you're incompetent or possibly malicious. If both survive but there are complications, you're suspected of using dark magic. Midwives walked a dangerous line between being essential community members and being targets for witchcraft accusations. Too many successful births, and people whispered that you must be using supernatural help. Too many deaths, and you were clearly cursed or evil. Wet nursing, breastfeeding another woman's baby, is an option if you've recently had a child and have milk to spare. Wealthy women sometimes hired wet nurses so they could avoid breastfeeding themselves, which was considered lower class, or so they could become pregnant again faster. You'd either live in their household or take the baby into yours. The pay was slightly better than most women's work, but the emotional cost was high. You were feeding someone else's child while potentially neglecting your own. And if the baby died while in your care, even from natural causes, You could be accused of murder or negligence. Some women resorted to begging, though it was dangerous and degrading. You'd position yourself outside churches, where people feeling pious might toss you a coin, or you'd approach travellers, hoping they'd give you something out of guilt or genuine charity. But begging marked you as the lowest of the low, and it invited abuse. People felt entitled to insult you, to question why you weren't working, to suggest that your poverty was a moral failure. A few women, desperate beyond measure, turned to prostitution. It was criminalised, condemned by the church, and incredibly dangerous, but it paid more than any other work available to women. You risked disease, violence, pregnancy, arrest, and social death. But when the choice is between prostitution and starvation, some women chose survival. Medieval cities sometimes had regulated brothels or red-light districts where prostitution was semi-tolerated as a necessary evil to protect respectable women from male lust, a disgusting logic that blamed women for men's behaviour. The fundamental problem is that the medieval economy is designed to keep women dependent on men. Women's work is undervalued, underpaid, and restricted to a narrow range of options that keep you poor and vulnerable. You can work yourself to exhaustion, and you'll still barely scrape by. You can be skilled, intelligent, and hard-working, and you'll still earn a fraction of what a man earns for easier work. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended, keeping women desperate enough that marriage, even to a terrible man, looks like the better option. And so you spin, weave, wash, sew, garden, and beg your way through each week, counting every coin, rationing every meal, and knowing that one bad harvest, one illness, one stroke of bad luck could tip you from poverty into total destitution. You're not building wealth. You're not getting ahead. You're just trying not to fall behind. And even that feels like an impossible goal. Let's get this out of the way. You're probably going to be accused of witchcraft at some point, not because you're actually practicing magic, but because you're a woman living alone, which is basically the same thing in the medieval mind. Got a cat? Familiar. Grow medicinal herbs, potions, mutter to yourself while cooking. Incantations. The accusation doesn't need evidence. It just needs a bad harvest, a sick cow, or a neighbour's child with a fever. Suddenly someone remembers you looked at them funny last month and boom, you're a witch. The accusation alone is damaging. Even if you're not formally tried, the rumour sticks. People avoid you. They stop buying your goods. Your priest gives you pointed sermons about the devil's servants. And if it goes further, if someone actually drags you before a court, your odds aren't great. You can't defend yourself effectively. You have no male advocate. And the tests for witchcraft are designed to confirm guilt, not innocence. The profile of a suspected witch in medieval Europe reads like a checklist of your life circumstances. Woman? Check. Living alone? Check. Past childbearing age or never married? Check. Owns a cat or keeps other animals? Check. Has knowledge of herbs and healing? Check. Has been seen muttering to herself? Check. Has had disputes with neighbours? Absolutely check. Because you've had to stand up for yourself when someone tried to cheat you, and assertiveness in a woman is definitely suspicious. You're basically walking around with a target painted on your back, and the only question is when, not if, someone will take aim. The cat situation is particularly absurd. You have a cat because cats catch mice, and mice eat your grain, which you can't afford to lose. It's practical pest control. But in the medieval imagination, that cat isn't just a cat. It's a familiar, a demonic spirit that serves you and helps you perform evil magic. People will note what colour it is. Black cats are the most suspicious, obviously, but really any cat will do. They'll watch to see if you talk to it. You do, because you're alone and lonely and the cat is the only living thing that doesn't judge you. They'll notice if the cat seems particularly attached to you, following you around, sleeping on your bed. This is taken as evidence that it's not a normal cat but a supernatural entity. Your herb garden is equally damning. You grow medicinal plants because you can't afford a physician, and you've learned from other women which herbs help with headaches, stomach troubles, or sleeplessness. Chamomile for calming, willow bark for pain, lavender for anxiety, sage for digestion. This is folk medicine, passed down through generations of women who had no other healthcare options. But to your neighbours, These plants are ingredients for potions. That's not medicine you're making, it's witchcraft. And if someone comes to you asking for help with an ailment, you're in a double bind. If you help them and they recover, you must have used magic. If you help them and they don't recover, or they get worse, you definitely used magic, the harmful kind. The evil eye belief is another trap. In medieval superstition, witches could curse people just by looking at them with malicious intent. So if you look at someone and something bad happens to them later, even weeks later, you might be accused of cursing them. Their cow dies, you gave it the evil eye, their child gets sick, you looked at them wrong at the well last Tuesday. Their bread doesn't rise. Clearly you've cursed their yeast. The timing doesn't need to make sense. The connection doesn't need to be logical. People remember what they want to remember when they're looking for someone to blame. Bad luck in the village becomes your fault by default. Crop failures, livestock deaths, mysterious illnesses, all of these need explanations, and random chance. Or, we live in a time with terrible sanitation and no understanding of disease aren't satisfying answers. People need someone to blame, and the woman living alone on the edge of the village is convenient. She's already suspect. She's already outside the normal social order. She probably did something to anger God or make a pact with the devil. Accusing her makes sense to people who are desperate, frightened, and looking for control in a world that feels chaotic and dangerous. Disputes make you vulnerable to accusations. Let's say your neighbour's chickens keep getting into your garden and eating your vegetables. You complain. Your neighbour dismisses you or tells you to build a better fence which you can't afford. You get angry. You say something like, "Those chickens are going to regret wandering into my garden." It's just frustrated venting, but your neighbour hears it as a threat. A week later, one of those chickens dies. Obviously you cursed it. You said it would regret coming into your garden and now it's dead. Witchcraft. The fact that chickens die all the time from various mundane causes is irrelevant. Once the rumour starts, it spreads with horrifying speed. Someone mentions at the well that they think you might be a witch. Someone else remembers that time you looked at them strangely. A third person recalls that their grandmother warned them about women who live alone. Within days, the village has collectively decided that you're probably practicing witchcraft, and now everyone is watching you even more closely, looking for confirmation. Every odd thing you do, every slightly unusual behaviour, gets added to the mental list of evidence. Children become particularly dangerous during this phase. Kids pick up on adult anxieties and amplify them. They start daring each other to walk past your cottage. They whisper about you, creating elaborate stories. She eats children. She flies on a broomstick at night. She can turn into a crow. These childish fantasies get repeated to parents, who don't dismiss them because, well, children are innocent and surely they're just reporting what they've seen, right? Never mind that children have vivid imaginations and are highly suggestible. Their testimony becomes part of the case against you. The church is supposed to be the voice of reason in all this, but often it's not. Some priests genuinely believed in witchcraft and saw it as their duty to root it out. Others were sceptical but couldn't openly contradict popular belief without losing their authority. And some actively encouraged witch hunts as a way to demonstrate their piety and commitment to fighting evil. If your local priest gives a sermon about the dangers of witchcraft and the devil's servants living among you, everyone in the congregation knows he's talking about you, the woman alone, the one who doesn't quite fit. If an accusation becomes formal, you're in serious danger. In some regions, you might be brought before a church court. In others, a secular court. The procedures vary, but the outcome is often predetermined. You're asked to confess. If you confess, you're guilty and will be punished, possibly executed, possibly given some lesser penalty if you recant and do penance. If you don't confess, you're subjected to tests designed to prove witchcraft. The swimming test is one of the most notorious. You're bound and thrown into water. If you float, you're a witch. The water, a pure element, rejects you because of your evil. If you sink, you're innocent, but you might drown before they pull you out, so congratulations on your posthumous exoneration. It's a lose-lose situation dressed up as justice. Some historians note that the swimming test wasn't universally used, and was even condemned by some authorities as superstitious nonsense, but it was popular enough in certain regions and time periods to be genuinely terrifying. Torture was often employed to extract confessions, particularly during the later medieval period and into the early modern era. You'd be subjected to sleep deprivation, starvation, physical pain, all designed to break you down until you'd confess to anything just to make it stop. And the confession they wanted was specific, that you'd made a pact with the devil, that you'd attended witches' sabbaths, that you'd performed malevolent magic against your neighbours. Once you confessed, your confession would be used to hunt down other suspected witches. They'd ask for names of your accomplices. In your exhausted, agonised state, you might name anyone. Women you barely knew, women you'd had disputes with, women you'd seen at the market. The witch hunt spreads like an infection. Even if you're acquitted or the accusation doesn't go to trial, the damage is done. Your reputation is destroyed. People cross the street to avoid you. No one will do business with you. Parents warn their children to stay away from your cottage. You've become a pariah, marked as dangerous even though you've done nothing wrong. Some women tried to leave and start over in a new village, but medieval people didn't move around easily, and strangers were always suspicious. You'd arrive in a new place with no history, no connections, no references, and people would ask questions you couldn't answer safely. The psychological impact is devastating. You start second-guessing everything you do. Should you get rid of your cat? But you need it for the mice, and getting rid of it might look like an admission of guilt. Should you stop growing herbs? But you need them for medicine. Should you stop talking to yourself? But the loneliness is crushing, and the sound of your own voice is the only company you have. You're trapped between the basic needs of survival and the fear that every survival strategy makes you look more guilty. Some women responded to accusations by leaning into them. If everyone thinks you're a witch, why not use that fear to your advantage? You let people believe you have power. You make vague, ominous statements when people cross you. You cultivate an air of mystery. It's dangerous, but it also gives you a tiny bit of leverage. People who fear your curses might be less likely to cheat you or attack you. Of course, it also means you're living on a knife's edge, one bad harvest away from being dragged before a court. The witch accusation is the ultimate weapon against women who don't conform, and you, living alone, are the definition of non-conformity. You're not under male authority. You're not performing the role of subservient, modest, invisible woman. You're surviving independently, and that's threatening. The witch accusation is how society punishes you for daring to exist outside the boundaries it's set for you. And the cruelest part, you don't have to do anything wrong. You don't have to practice actual magic or harm anyone. You just have to be a woman alone with a cat and a herb garden, living through a period when people needed someone to blame for the hardships of medieval life. Your existence is the crime. Everything else is just the excuse. The church is complicated. On one hand, it's one of the few institutions that offers women any kind of independent path. Nuns, anchoresses, beguines living in semi-religious communities. On the other hand, it's also the institution most invested in controlling your body, your sexuality, and your choices. As a laywoman living alone, you walk a tightrope. You need to appear pious enough to deflect suspicion, but not so pious that people think you're putting on a performance to hide sin. You attend Mass regularly, confess often, and make sure the priest knows you're not hosting strange men or engaging in unnatural acts like reading or having opinions. Some women found genuine refuge in religious devotion. It gave them purpose, community, and a language to explain their choices. But for others, it was just another surveillance system, another set of eyes watching, another voice telling them they were doing it wrong. Let's start with the basics. Church attendance is mandatory. Not attending Mass on Sundays and holy days, and there are a lot of holy days, is a sin that could get you fined, publicly shamed, or hauled before the church court. So every Sunday you walk to the village church, trying to time your arrival so you're neither suspiciously early nor suspiciously late. You stand through the entire service because pews don't exist yet, or if they do, they're reserved for the wealthy. The Mass is in Latin, which you don't understand. The priest's back is to you for most of it. You can't see what he's doing at the altar, but you're expected to follow along, to cross yourself at the appropriate moments, to kneel when everyone else kneels, to mouth the prayers you've memorized phonetically without understanding them. Your position in the church is strategic. You don't stand too close to the married women with their families. That would be presumptuous. You don't stand with the young unmarried girls. You're too old and suspicious for that group. You find a spot somewhere in the middle, alone but visible. demonstrating your attendance without drawing attention. The priest can see you. The other parishioners can see you. You're performing piety for an audience that's always watching and rarely impressed. After Mass, you don't leave immediately. That would look like you're just going through the motions. Instead, you linger, perhaps saying a prayer at the side altar, lighting a candle if you can afford one, making yourself visible in devotion. You might drop a coin in the alms box, not too much, because you're poor and everyone knows it, but enough to show you're contributing. The priest sometimes stations himself by the door after Mass, observing who leaves, who stays, who seems genuinely devout versus who seems to be performing. You're always performing. Confession is its own nightmare. You're supposed to confess regularly, at minimum once a year during Lent, but preferably more often. The problem is that confession requires you to kneel in a small enclosed space with a priest and verbally catalogue your sins while he sits in judgment. For a woman alone, this is fraught. What do you confess? If you confess to real sins, anger at your neighbours, envy of women with husbands, resentment toward God for your circumstances, the priest will lecture you and might share your confession with others, despite the seal of confession being theoretically sacred. If you confess only minor vague sins, impatience, occasional unkind thoughts, he might think you're hiding something worse. And then there are the questions the priest asks. He's supposed to help you examine your conscience, but sometimes the questions reveal what he's really wondering about. Have you been alone with men? Have you had impure thoughts? Have you used herbs or charms for any purpose? These aren't spiritual guidance, they're interrogation. Your answers become part of the informal record the priest keeps in his head about who's suspicious and who's safe. Some priests were genuinely compassionate, trying to help their parishioners navigate difficult lives. Others were controlling, judgmental, and used confession as a tool of social regulation. The Church's teachings about women are deeply unflattering. You're told repeatedly that women are weak, sinful, easily corrupted, and dangerous. Eve's sin is your burden. Mary's virginity is the impossible standard. The message is clear. The only good woman is either a virgin devoted to God or a wife devoted to her husband. You, being neither, occupy a suspicious third category. The sermons you hear emphasize women's need for guidance, their susceptibility to the devil's influence, their responsibility for male sin. Because if a man looks at you with lust, that's somehow your fault for existing in a body. Some women found genuine spiritual solace despite all this. They developed deep prayer lives, rich interior worlds where they communed with God or the Virgin Mary or their favourite saints. For these women, religion wasn't just obligation, it was genuine comfort. Prayer gave structure to lonely days. The rituals provided meaning. The stories of female saints offered models of women who suffered and endured and were eventually vindicated. Saints like Mary Magdalene, the redeemed prostitute, or St. Margaret, the virgin martyr, became spiritual companions. You might talk to them in your prayers, asking for intercession, imagining them understanding your struggles in ways the living people around you never would. Religious feast days break up the monotony of medieval life. These are days when work stops, when the village comes together for celebration, when there might be special food or entertainment. For a woman alone, feast days are complicated. You're expected to participate in the communal celebration, but not too enthusiastically. You attend the special Mass, maybe bring flowers or herbs to decorate the church. You might receive blessed bread or holy water to take home for protection. But the social gatherings afterward, the feasting, the dancing, the merrymaking, those are harder to navigate. You can't be too withdrawn or you look disdainful of community. You can't be too involved or you look like you're seeking male attention. Some women tried to increase their respectability through conspicuous religious devotion. They joined confraternities, religious organisations for lay people that performed charitable works, organised prayers, and supported the church. Being part of a confraternity gave you legitimate reasons to be out and about, meeting with other members, participating in religious processions. It created a social identity beyond woman living alone. You became member of the Confraternity of the Holy Cross, or devoted to the cult of St. Catherine. It was armour made of piety. Pilgrimage was another option, though risky for a woman alone. Going on pilgrimage to a holy site, a cathedral with important relics, a shrine where miracles occurred, was considered spiritually meritorious. It could wipe away sins, cure illnesses, or fulfill vows. But travelling alone as a woman was dangerous. You might join a group of pilgrims for safety, but that meant travelling with strangers and depending on their protection. Some women went anyway, driven by genuine devotion or desperate hope that a miracle at a distant shrine might change their circumstances. Others went because leaving the village where everyone knew and judged them offered a brief taste of freedom. The possibility of religious life proper, becoming a nun, existed in theory but was practically out of reach for most women in your position. Convents required dowries, just like marriage. You were supposed to bring money or property when you entered, to support the community and demonstrate your family's commitment. Poor women couldn't afford this. Some convents accepted women as lay sisters, essentially servants who lived in the convent but didn't take full vows and had lower status than the choir nuns. It was hard work with little autonomy, but it offered safety, regular meals, and a roof that didn't leak quite as much as yours. Anchoresses were women who chose to be permanently enclosed in small cells attached to churches, dedicating their lives to prayer and contemplation. They were literally walled in during a ceremony that resembled a funeral, with a small window opening into the church so they could observe Mass, and another window facing outward where they could offer spiritual counsel to visitors. It sounds horrifying, and for many women it probably was, but some genuinely chose this path as the ultimate form of devotion. And in a twisted way, being an anchoress was one of the few ways a woman could live alone with full social legitimacy. You were alone, but you were alone for God, which made it acceptable. Beguines were an interesting phenomenon, particularly in the Low Countries and parts of Germany. These were communities of religious women who lived together, supported themselves through textile work or other labour, and devoted time to prayer and charity, but without taking permanent vows. They weren't nuns exactly, but they weren't laywomen exactly either. They existed in a grey area that gave them surprising autonomy. Some beguinages were large communities with their own churches, hospitals and governing structures. For a woman with no other options, joining a Beguine community could offer safety, purpose and the company of other women. Of course, the church was deeply suspicious of Beguines precisely because they were autonomous, and there were periodic crackdowns, accusations of heresy, and attempts to regulate or eliminate them. The church's control extended into every intimate aspect of your life. Your sexuality, or lack thereof, was constantly monitored. As an unmarried woman, you were expected to be celibate. Any suggestion that you were sexually active would destroy you. But you were also suspect for being celibate, because how could a woman alone resist temptation without divine intervention? The church taught that women had insatiable sexual appetites, that you were basically walking bundles of lust that needed constant male supervision to keep in check. So your celibacy was either evidence that you were unnaturally pious, suspicious, or evidence that you were hiding sexual activity, also suspicious. Religious objects offered some protection. You might own a cheap rosary, wooden beads on a string that you could use for prayers. You'd hang a crude crucifix on your wall, visible to anyone who entered. You might have a small medallion of a saint sewn into your clothing. These objects served as both genuine devotional items and as visual proof of your orthodoxy. Look, I'm a good Christian. See the cross? See the rosary? I'm not a heretic or a witch. But the church also took tithes. 1/10 of your income or produce were mandatory. Even when you were barely surviving, the church expected its share. The priest would come around at harvest time, collecting grain, eggs, whatever you had. The logic was that you were supporting God's work on earth, but when you were hungry, and the priest was well fed, the logic felt thin. Some women resented the church's wealth, its elaborate buildings and rich vestments, while they wore rags and went without food. But you couldn't say that out loud. Criticizing the church was heresy. The tension between religion as comfort and religion as control probably existed in your mind constantly. You might pray genuinely, finding solace in the ritual and the belief that someone somewhere was listening. But you also prayed strategically, performing devotion because it kept you safer. You might love the Virgin Mary as a figure of female strength and mercy, while resenting the male priests who used Mary's perfection as a weapon against real women who couldn't possibly live up to that standard. The church shaped your calendar, your vocabulary, your understanding of the world. It told you that suffering was redemptive, that poverty was spiritually valuable, that your difficult life was preparing you for heaven. Some women believed this and found it comforting. Others suspected it was convenient theology designed to keep poor people compliant. But either way, you couldn't escape the church. It was everywhere. In the bell that rang the hours, in the crosses at every intersection, in the prayers everyone muttered, in the fear of hell that haunted the edges of every choice. Religion was your shield against accusations of immorality, but it was also your prison. Another set of walls hemming you in. Another voice telling you how to live, what to think, who to be. And like everything else in your life as a woman alone, you had to navigate it carefully, performing just enough piety to survive without drawing the wrong kind of attention. Your day starts before the sun does. You wake to cold air, a dead fire, and the knowledge that everything you do today will be hard and will hurt. First, you restart the fire, coaxing embers back to life with dry kindling and prayer. Then you heat water, if you have any, and begin the endless cycle of tasks that keep you alive. Fetching water from the well, trying not to make eye contact with the women who'll gossip about you later. Tending your small garden, pulling weeds, checking for pests, hoping this year's crop doesn't fail. Preparing a meal from whatever you have. Onions, turnips, a crust of bread, maybe some weak ale. If you're lucky, you have work today, spinning wool, mending a kirtle, washing someone's laundry. If you're not lucky, you sit and worry about how you'll pay next month's rent to the Lord's bailiff, who's already made it clear he expects favours from women without husbands. You don't wake to an alarm clock. You wake because your body is cold, uncomfortable, and trained by months or years of this routine to rouse itself before dawn. The cottage is dark. If it's winter, it's brutally cold. Your breath makes clouds in the air, and your joints are stiff from lying on the thin straw mattress. If it's summer, you might have gotten a few more hours of decent sleep, but the fleas ensured it wasn't restful. You lie there for a moment, gathering the will to face another day, then force yourself upright because lying in bed won't start the fire or fetch the water or earn the coins you need. The fire is your first battle. Last night you banked it carefully, covered the embers with ash to keep them smouldering slowly through the night. If you did it right, there are still live coals under there. You carefully brush away the ash, add the driest kindling you have, small twigs, bark, maybe some dried moss, and blow gently, coaxing the embers back into flame. It's a delicate process. Blow too hard and you scatter the embers. Not hard enough and nothing catches. Your eyes water from the smoke. Your lungs burn. But eventually, if you're lucky and the kindling is dry, a tiny flame appears. You feed it carefully, adding slightly larger sticks, building it up until you can add actual firewood. If the fire went out completely during the night, your morning just got much harder. You'll need to borrow fire from a neighbour, which means a humiliating walk to their door, asking for coals. Or you'll need to use flint and steel, striking them together over a pile of tinder trying to catch a spark. It can take dozens of attempts, and your hands are already cold and clumsy. Some mornings, you seriously consider just staying in bed and accepting death by hypothermia, but you don't, because humans are stubborn, and you've survived this long by being more stubborn than your circumstances. Once the fire is going, you put a pot of water on to heat, assuming you have water. If you don't, the well is your next destination. You grab your wooden bucket and head out into the pre-dawn dimness. The village is quiet but not silent. Other people are stirring. Men heading to the fields, women starting their own fires, roosters crowing obnoxiously. The well is a short walk, but it feels longer when you're tired, cold, and already dreading the encounter. There's always someone at the well. It's the village social hub and also a surveillance checkpoint. You nod politely to whoever's there. Morning, they nod back, assessing you with their eyes. Your posture, your clothes, your expression. Everything is data. You lower your bucket, pull up water, and pour it into your larger carrying bucket. The water is cold, often freezing in winter. Your hands ache from the temperature and the weight. You make small talk if you have to. Comments about the weather, the upcoming holy day, anything neutral. Then you leave as quickly as you can without looking like you're fleeing. The walk back to your cottage is harder because the bucket is heavy. Water sloshes against your skirt, your arms strain. You're careful not to spill because you're not making this trip twice. Once home, you pour some water into your cooking pot to heat. The rest goes into a ceramic jug for later. You'll need water for cooking, for washing, for drinking. One bucket isn't really enough, but it'll have to be. With water heating, you turn to breakfast, which is a generous term for what you're about to eat. You have a crust of bread from yesterday, hard as a rock. You dip it in the heated water to soften it enough to chew without breaking your teeth. Maybe you have an onion. You slice off a piece, chew it with the bread. If you brewed ale recently, you drink some of that. It's weak, barely alcoholic, but safer than unboiled water, and slightly more nutritious than nothing. This is breakfast. It takes about 5 minutes to eat, provides minimal energy, and leaves you still hungry. Welcome to medieval nutrition. After breakfast, you assess your day. What work do you have? If you're spinning, you need to set up your distaff and spindle, load the raw wool, and start the endless process of twist and pull, twist and pull. Your hands move automatically while your mind wanders, though not too far because you need to maintain tension and rhythm. Hours pass. Your back aches from sitting hunched over. Your fingers develop calluses on top of calluses, but slowly the raw wool becomes thread, and thread can be sold. If you're weaving, you sit at your loom, threading the shuttle back and forth, pressing the beater to pack the weft threads tight. It's repetitive work that requires focus. Lose your place in the pattern, and you've ruined a section that has to be redone. The loom creaks, your legs work the pedals, your arms and shoulders burn from the repetitive motion. The cottage fills with the rhythmic sound of wood on wood, thread sliding through thread. If you're washing laundry, you're in for a physical ordeal. You've already hauled the water. Now you need to heat more of it, add lye soap that burns your skin, scrub each piece of fabric against a washboard or flat stone, rinse everything, wring it out with hands that are already cracked and bleeding from previous washings, and hang it somewhere to dry. In good weather, you can hang it outside on bushes or over ropes. In bad weather, it drips all over your cottage, making everything damp and raising the humidity to the point where you feel like you're living inside a wet sock. If you have sewing work, you sit by the window, that small dim opening that lets in barely enough light, and strain your eyes over tiny stitches. Your needle is precious, made of bone or metal, irreplaceable if you lose it. You thread it with whatever colour thread matches the fabric and you sew. Hems, seams, patches. Sometimes decorative embroidery if the client wants it and will pay extra. Your fingers prick themselves regularly despite your care. Blood on white fabric is a disaster. You suck your finger, wait for it to stop bleeding, and continue. Between work tasks, you tend the garden. This isn't optional. Your garden is producing the vegetables that keep you from starvation. You pull weeds that compete with your plants for nutrients. You check for pests, caterpillars, beetles, slugs, and remove them by hand, crushing them or tossing them away from your plot. You water if it hasn't rained, hauling yet more water from the well. You check the progress of your beans, your cabbages, your onions. You calculate in your head how much longer until harvest, how much you'll be able to eat versus sell, whether it'll be enough. If you have chickens, they need tending too. You let them out of their coop in the morning to scratch around your yard. You check for eggs, a daily treasure hunt that sometimes yields 1 or 2 precious eggs, sometimes nothing. You make sure they have water and scattered grain if you have any to spare. You shoo them away from your garden because chickens have no respect for your vegetables. At dusk, you herd them back into their coop and secure it against foxes, weasels, and thieves. Midday, you eat again. Same food as breakfast, basically. Maybe you heat up some of the pottage that's been sitting in the pot. It's a permanent stew that you just keep adding to, so it's never really fresh, but also never completely old. Onions, beans if you have them, maybe a turnip, all boiled together into something that's mostly just hot and filling. You eat quickly because you need to get back to work. The afternoon is more of the same, more spinning, weaving, washing, sewing. Your body is tired, but stopping means not earning, and not earning means not eating tomorrow, so you push through. Your back screams, your hands shake, your eyes blur from strain. But you keep working because the alternative is worse. If you need to go to market, that interrupts the workday. You gather whatever you have to sell, thread, vegetables, eggs, and walk to the village square or wherever the market is held. You find a spot, set out your goods, and wait, and wait, and wait. Customers browse. They pick up your thread and criticize its thickness. They examine your vegetables and point out imperfections. They haggle ruthlessly because they know you need the sale more than they need your goods. You negotiate, compromise, and eventually sell what you can for less than you wanted. Then you walk home with a few coins that have to cover your rent, your taxes, and whatever supplies you need. Errands pile up. You might need to visit the miller to have grain ground into flour, which costs money or a portion of your grain. You might need to see the blacksmith about a broken tool, which you can't afford to replace but can't afford not to fix. You might need to gather firewood from the common forest, dragging branches back to your cottage and chopping them into manageable pieces with a hatchet that's more rust than blade. As evening approaches, the light begins to fail. If you're lucky enough to have work that's nearly finished, you race against the dying light, squinting at your stitches or your thread. When it becomes too dark to see, you stop. You can't afford to waste candles on extending your workday. The fire provides some light, but not enough for detailed work. Dinner is, shockingly, the same as breakfast and lunch. Bread, onions, pottage, weak ale. You eat by firelight, sitting on your wobbly stool, too tired to taste anything. After dinner, there's still work, banking the fire for the night, securing the cottage, making sure your few possessions are stored away from mice. You might sit for a few minutes staring into the fire, letting your mind drift. This is as close to leisure as you get. Exhausted silence in front of dying embers. You prepare for bed, which means essentially nothing. You're already wearing most of your clothes. You might take off your outer layer if it's particularly dirty or wet. You lie down on your straw mattress, pull your thin blanket over yourself and close your eyes. Your body aches everywhere. Your hands throb. Your back feels like it's been beaten with sticks. But sleep comes quickly because you're so exhausted. And tomorrow you'll wake before dawn and do it all again. This is your daily routine. Not exciting, not fulfilling, just endless labour in exchange for the bare minimum of survival. There are no days off, no vacations, no retirement plans, just day after day of work that's hard, that hurts, and that barely keeps you alive. It's not a life, it's an endurance test, and the only prize for winning is getting to take the test again tomorrow. Eating as a single woman is an exercise in scarcity management. You don't get invited to communal feasts. You don't have a husband bringing home wages or a father storing grain. Everything you eat, you've earned, grown, bartered, or begged for. Your diet is monotonous. Pottage, bread, onions, cabbage, turnips. Occasionally an egg. Rarely meat. Maybe a bit of bacon on a saint's day if you can afford it. Or some fish if you live near water. You stretch every ingredient. Bones get boiled multiple times. Stale bread becomes trenchers or gets soaked in broth. Spoiled vegetables get cut around and cooked anyway, because waste isn't an option. Hunger is your constant companion. Not the dramatic, clutching your stomach kind, but the low-grade, bone-deep kind that makes you tired and cold and slow. You're never quite full, and in winter, when the stored food runs low, you're never quite sure you'll make it to spring. Let's start with bread, the foundation of the medieval diet. For wealthier people, bread is made from wheat flour, white, soft, relatively pleasant. For you, bread is dark, dense, and made from whatever grain is cheapest. Rye, barley, or oats. Sometimes it's mixed with peas or beans to stretch the flour further. Sometimes, in truly desperate times, it contains sawdust, ground acorns, or bark. The bread isn't fresh daily. You can't afford to fire up the communal oven that often, and the fee for using it eats into your tiny budget. So you bake once a week if you're lucky, maybe less often, and the bread goes stale almost immediately. By day 3, it's hard enough to use as a weapon. By day 7, it requires soaking in liquid just to become chewable. But stale bread isn't wasted. It becomes trenchers, thick slices that serve as edible plates. You put your pottage or whatever sad vegetables you have on top of the bread, let it soak up the liquid, and then eat the soggy bread plate. It's efficient. It's disgusting. It's survival. Sometimes the bread develops mould. You cut around the mouldy parts and eat the rest. You can't afford to throw away an entire loaf because of a little mould. What's a little fungus between you and starvation? Pottage is your constant companion. It's the medieval equivalent of stone soup. You put whatever you have into a pot with water and cook it until it's edible. The pot sits over your fire constantly, and you just keep adding to it. Onions, turnips, cabbage, beans if you have them, herbs for flavour, water to keep it from becoming too thick. It's never quite fresh because you're not eating the whole pot in one sitting. You ladle out a bowl, eat it, and the rest sits there until the next meal. Day after day, the same pot, the same flavours, occasionally refreshed with new ingredients, but basically the same disappointing stew. The taste? Imagine boiled sadness with a hint of onion. There's no salt unless you've managed to afford some, which you usually haven't. There's no pepper or exotic spices. Those are for rich people. Your seasoning options are whatever herbs you grow. Thyme, sage, maybe some garlic if you're lucky. The pottage isn't meant to be delicious. It's meant to keep you alive, to put something warm in your stomach, to trick your body into thinking it's been fed. Vegetables are what you can grow or afford. Onions are reliable, cheap, and grow in terrible soil. They're in everything you eat. Cabbage is another staple. It stores relatively well and can be eaten fresh or fermented. Turnips are the medieval MVP of vegetables nobody wants but everyone needs. They're bland, starchy, and will grow basically anywhere. You plant them in your garden not because you enjoy them, but because they're insurance against starvation. Beans and peas are protein sources, valuable but require better soil and more care. If your garden produces beans, you're having a good year. Eggs are treasure. If your chickens are laying, you have a source of protein that's compact, versatile and tradable. But chickens are moody. They lay less in winter. They stop laying if they're stressed, sick or just feeling like it. On good days, you might get 1 or 2 eggs. You eat them scrambled in a pan over the fire or boiled or stirred into pottage to make it slightly more substantial. You never waste an egg. If a chicken stops laying entirely, you have to make a brutal calculation. Is this chicken worth feeding? Or should it become dinner? Killing a chicken means 1 meal of meat, precious and rare, but also means 1 fewer potential egg producer. It's a gamble you agonize over. Meat is a fantasy for most of the year. You can't afford to buy it regularly. Hunting is illegal. The game belongs to the Lord and poaching can get you hanged. Even if you could hunt, you don't have weapons or skills. So meat appears in your diet maybe a handful of times per year. On major religious feast days, there might be a communal meal where meat is distributed. Christmas, Easter, important saints' days. These are when you might taste pork, beef, or mutton. You eat it slowly, savouring every bite, knowing it'll be months before you taste it again. Fish is slightly more accessible if you live near water. Freshwater fish from rivers or ponds, or salted fish if you're near the coast or a trade route. The Catholic Church mandates meatless days, Fridays, Lent, various other holy days, which technically means you're supposed to eat fish instead. But fish costs money too, and you don't always have it. On meatless days, you just eat more pottage and pretend it's adequate. Salted fish is cheaper than fresh, but requires soaking to remove the salt, and even then it's tough, dry and fishy in a way that's more punishment than nutrition. Dairy products are complicated. Milk spoils quickly, so unless you have your own goat, which you probably don't because goats require feeding and space, fresh milk isn't part of your diet. Cheese and butter store better, but they're expensive. You might buy a small amount of hard cheese occasionally, rationing it out in tiny portions to make it last. Butter is a luxury you mostly can't afford. When you do have it, you use it sparingly, mostly for special occasions or when you're sick and need the calories. Seasonality dictates everything. In late summer and early fall after harvest, food is relatively plentiful. Your garden is producing. Grain prices are lower. You might actually feel full occasionally. This is the time to preserve what you can. Drying beans, storing root vegetables in a cool spot, salting or smoking anything that won't keep otherwise. But your storage is limited. You don't have a proper root cellar, just a corner of your cottage or a hole dug in the ground. Mice, rot and mould are constant enemies. As winter progresses, food becomes scarcer. Your stored vegetables shrink and wither. The beans run low, grain prices rise as supplies dwindle. This is when hunger becomes acute. You start rationing more severely. 1 meal a day instead of 2. Smaller portions, weaker pottage, more water, and less substance. You feel cold all the time because your body doesn't have enough fuel to generate heat. You feel tired because you're malnourished. Your thinking becomes foggy. Your body starts consuming itself, burning muscle for energy because there's no fat left to burn. By late winter, February, March, people are dying. The old, the young, the already weak. They call it the hungry gap, the time between when stored food runs out and when new crops aren't ready yet. You survive this period through desperation and creativity. You forage for anything edible. Early greens, roots, tree bark if necessary. You water down your pottage even more. You eat things you wouldn't consider food in better times, and you pray that spring comes quickly, that your garden starts producing soon, that you make it to the next harvest. Hunger affects everything. Your mood darkens. You become irritable, depressed, listless. Your immune system weakens, making you more susceptible to illness. Your wounds heal slower. Your hair becomes brittle. Your nails crack. Your skin takes on a greyish, unhealthy tone. You fantasize about food constantly, imagining feasts you'll never attend, meals you'll never eat. The fantasy becomes a form of torture, your mind showing you everything you can't have. Foraging supplements your diet when you can manage it. Wild garlic, nettles, dandelion greens. These are free food if you know where to look and what's safe to eat. Mushrooms are risky because some are poisonous, but if you're knowledgeable, you can gather edible ones. Berries in late summer, nuts in fall. You're competing with every other desperate person for these wild resources, so the best spots get picked clean quickly. You have to wake early, walk far, and hope you find something before someone else does. Water is your primary beverage, though as mentioned, it's often unsafe. You drink weak ale or beer because the brewing process involves boiling, which kills some pathogens. But brewing requires grain, which costs money, or uses grain you could eat. It's a constant calculation. Use grain for bread or for ale. You usually choose bread and drink water, risking illness for the sake of more calories. On very rare occasions, someone shows you unexpected kindness. A neighbour leaves a basket of apples at your door. The baker gives you the burned bottom crust that can't be sold. Someone's chicken lays extra eggs and they share one with you. These moments of charity are simultaneously heartwarming and humiliating. You're grateful, genuinely grateful, but you also hate that you need charity, that you can't provide for yourself, that your survival depends on other people's occasional generosity. The social aspect of food makes your isolation more acute. Wealthier households have feasts, celebrations, communal meals. You're not invited. You hear about them afterward. The roasted meats, the pies, the ale flowing freely. You smell cooking from other cottages and know they're eating better than you. Food is social currency, and you're bankrupt. You can't invite anyone over for a meal because you don't have food to share. You can't contribute to communal celebrations. You're on the outside, hungry and alone. Feast days are particularly cruel. The church calendar includes numerous feast days where, theoretically, everyone celebrates with special food. For most people, this means slightly better meals, maybe some meat, some sweet treats. For you, it means watching others celebrate while you eat your same pottage, maybe with an extra onion if you're feeling festive. The contrast between what the day is supposed to be and what it actually is for you is crushing. You develop strategies to cope with hunger. You drink water to fill your stomach temporarily. You chew on scraps of leather to give your jaw something to do. You go to bed early to avoid feeling hungry in the evening. You distract yourself with work, even when you're too weak to work effectively. You tell yourself stories about future harvests, imagining abundance that probably won't come. Sometimes you wonder if it would be easier to just give up, to stop fighting for every scrap, every meal, every day. But hunger, paradoxically, also makes you fiercely determined. You've survived this long. You've made it through other winters. You're stubborn in the way starving people become, convinced that if you can just hold on a little longer, things will improve. They usually don't improve much, but somehow you keep going anyway. And when spring finally arrives, when the first greens start appearing in your garden, when you can harvest early lettuce and radishes, the relief is overwhelming. You eat fresh vegetables with an intensity that borders on religious experience. You've survived another winter. You're still here. And even though you know next winter will be just as hard, for now, in this moment, you have fresh food, and you're alive. That counts for something. Not much, but something. Bathing is complicated, not because you don't want to be clean, but because being clean requires resources you don't have. Hot water, soap, privacy, time. Public bathhouses exist in some towns, but they're expensive and often double as brothels, so a respectable woman alone can't go there without destroying her reputation. So you make do. You wash your face and hands with cold water from a basin. You scrub your armpits and between your legs with a rag when you can. Your hair gets combed for lice regularly, because everyone has lice, but washing it is a rare event involving heated water, ashes for soap, and hours of drying time you don't have. Your clothes don't get washed often either. You own maybe 2 outfits total, and washing them means being cold and half naked while they dry. So they accumulate sweat, smoke, and stains, and you smell like everyone else, earthy, smoky, faintly sour. But if you smell too bad, people comment, and if you try too hard to stay clean, they wonder where you got the water and the time, and whether you're trying to attract male attention. Let's start with the most basic question. How often do you bathe? The answer is almost never, at least not in the way modern people understand bathing. A full body wash in heated water is a luxury that requires hauling multiple buckets of water from the well, heating them over your fire which burns through precious firewood, and having some kind of basin or tub large enough to sit in. You don't own a tub. Even if you did, filling it would take hours of work and use up resources you can't spare. So full baths happen maybe a few times a year, if that. Major religious holidays, weddings if you somehow get invited to one, or when you're so filthy that you can't stand yourself anymore. For daily hygiene, you work with what's called a bird bath. Minimal water, maximum efficiency. You keep a basin in your cottage, a shallow ceramic or wooden bowl. Every morning, if you can manage it, you pour a little cold water into it and use a rag to wipe down your face, neck, hands and arms. The water is shockingly cold, especially in winter when it's barely above freezing. It wakes you up in the most unpleasant way possible, like being slapped by winter itself. You scrub quickly because lingering means losing feeling in your fingers. The more intimate areas, armpits, groin, between your breasts if you're larger, get attention when you can manage it, but not daily. You use the same rag, dampened with cold water, and try to remove the worst of the sweat and grime. There's no deodorant, no body powder, nothing to mask odour. You just try to minimise the accumulation of filth and hope that your smell isn't noticeably worse than everyone else's. Spoiler, everyone smells terrible. Medieval Europe is a symphony of body odour, and you're just one instrument in the orchestra. Soap exists but is expensive and harsh. It's made from animal fat and wood ash lye, a caustic combination that cleans effectively but also strips oils from your skin and can cause burns if it's too strong. Most people can't afford proper soap regularly. You might have a small piece that you ration carefully, using it for washing clothes rather than your body because clothes can withstand the harshness better. For personal washing, you might use just water, or water with a bit of ash stirred in if you're trying to get particularly clean. Sometimes you rub yourself with herbs, mint, lavender, rosemary, not because they clean, but because they smell better than you do. Your hair is its own battleground. Medieval people didn't wash their hair frequently because it was a production. You'd need to heat water, pour it over your head, work some kind of cleanser through it, usually ash water or a mixture of herbs, and then rinse it thoroughly, which requires more heated water. Then comes the drying, which in a cold, drafty cottage takes hours. Wet hair in medieval Europe is dangerous. It can make you sick, or so everyone believes. And practically speaking, sitting around with soaking wet hair in a freezing cottage is miserable, and could genuinely lead to illness through exposure and lowered immunity. So hair washing happens infrequently, maybe once a month, maybe less. In between washings, you comb it, obsessively, because everyone has lice, and combing is your primary defence. You own a simple wooden or bone comb, and you drag it through your hair section by section, catching lice and their eggs, nits, and crushing them between your thumbnails. It's tedious, gross, and completely normal. Children sit while their mothers delouse them. Women delouse each other. It's so common that no one is embarrassed by it. Having lice isn't a sign of poor hygiene. It's just a fact of medieval life. But if you let the lice population get too out of control, people notice. Your scalp becomes visible, irritated, red, and inflamed from scratching. You start scratching unconsciously during conversations. Small white nits become visible in your hair. At that point, you're not just lousy, you're noticeably lousy, which is a different category of problem. So you stay on top of it as best you can, combing regularly, checking for the worst infestations, and occasionally treating your hair with strong-smelling herbs that lice supposedly hate. Your teeth are a horror show. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss, no dentist. Some people chew on twigs to clean their teeth, hazel or willow twigs, frayed at the end to make a crude brush. Some rinse their mouths with water, wine, or vinegar. but mostly people just don't do much dental care at all. Your teeth yellow, develop cavities, and eventually rot. Your breath is bad. Everyone's breath is bad. A combination of tooth decay, gum disease, and diet heavy in onions creates a miasma that hovers around every conversation. By your 30s, if you make it that far, you're probably missing several teeth. By your 40s, your smile looks like a jack-o'-lantern. Toothaches are constant throbbing companions. The pain can be excruciating, but there's no real treatment except extraction, and extraction means a barber surgeon with pliers, no anaesthesia, and a significant risk of infection afterward. So you live with the pain, using clove oil if you can get it, holding warm cloths to your face, and praying that the tooth doesn't abscess. If it does abscess, you're facing a potentially fatal infection that starts in your mouth and spreads through your body. Your nails are practical, not decorative. You keep them short by breaking them or biting them, because long nails are impractical for manual labour and collect dirt underneath. Your hands are rough, calloused, often cut or scratched from work. You have no hand lotion, no manicure, nothing to soften the skin. In winter, your hands crack and bleed from the cold and the constant exposure to water when you wash laundry. You might rub them with animal fat to try to seal the cracks, but it only helps marginally. Your feet, if you go barefoot, are tough as leather. The soles develop thick calluses that protect you from stones and rough ground, but they also crack, accumulate dirt, and occasionally get infected if you step on something sharp. If you own shoes, your feet are only slightly better off, because medieval shoes aren't exactly comfortable or protective. They're basically leather bags tied around your feet and they don't breathe, so your feet sweat and develop their own special smell. Clothing hygiene is perhaps the worst aspect because you can't easily separate yourself from your clothes. You own maybe 2 outfits, one you're wearing and one that's theoretically cleaner. Washing clothes is labour-intensive, as we've discussed, so it doesn't happen often. Maybe once a month if you're diligent and have the resources, maybe less. So your clothes absorb everything. Sweat, smoke from the fire, food stains, dirt, more sweat. The fabric becomes stiff with accumulated grime. It chafes, it smells, and there's nothing you can do about it except occasionally beat it with a stick to knock loose some of the dirt. Medieval people tried to manage body odour and hygiene through other means. They wore linen undergarments, shifts or chemises that could be changed and washed more frequently than outer clothes. The theory was that linen absorbed sweat and oils, protecting the more expensive outer garments. If you were wealthy enough to own multiple linen shifts, you could rotate them, washing one while wearing the other. If you weren't, and you probably weren't, you had one shift that you wore until it was more whole than fabric. Herbs and flowers served as medieval deodorant. People tucked sachets of lavender, rose petals or sweet-smelling herbs into their clothing, or wore them in small bags around their necks. It didn't eliminate odour, but it created a more pleasant competing smell. You might rub your armpits with mint leaves or tuck rosemary into your bodice. Did it work? Not really. But it was better than nothing, and the herbs were free if you grew them. The contradiction of hygiene as a woman alone is maddening. If you're too dirty, too smelly, too obviously uncared for, people judge you as slovenly and immoral. Cleanliness is associated with godliness, and being visibly filthy suggests spiritual corruption. But if you're too clean, too concerned with your appearance, you're vain and probably trying to seduce men. You need to hit the impossible middle ground of acceptably grimy, clean enough not to offend, dirty enough not to raise suspicion. Public bathhouses in cities large enough to have them offered a solution but created new problems. These were commercial establishments where you could pay to bathe in heated water, sometimes even with soap provided. In theory, wonderful. In practice, bathhouses developed reputations as places where prostitution happened. The combination of nakedness, warm water, and privacy made them ideal for sexual commerce. Some bathhouses were legitimate, others were brothels with a bathing side business. As a woman alone, entering a bathhouse meant being associated with prostitution, regardless of your intentions. Respectable women didn't go. Prostitutes did. Therefore, if you went, you were declaring yourself sexually available. So you avoided bathhouses, even if you desperately wanted a hot bath. The social cost was too high. Instead, you shivered through cold water washes in your cottage and accepted that true cleanliness was a luxury you couldn't afford. Not financially, not socially, not practically. The psychological impact of never feeling truly clean is hard to quantify. There's a constant low-level discomfort. Your skin itches, your scalp itches, your clothes chafe. You're always slightly aware of your own smell and wondering if others are noticing. You can't ever fully relax into your body because your body is fundamentally uncomfortable. Modern people can shower away a bad day. You carry your bad days in layers of grime that accumulate because you don't have the resources to wash them away. Menstruation adds another layer of difficulty to hygiene. You use rags, literal rags, pieces of old fabric to absorb menstrual blood. These rags need to be washed and reused because you can't afford to keep using new fabric every month. So you're washing blood out of rags with cold water and harsh soap, trying to get them clean enough to use again, all while dealing with cramps, fatigue, and the general discomfort of medieval life. And you have to be discreet about it because menstruation is considered shameful and polluting. You can't hang your menstrual rags out to dry where neighbours might see them, so you dry them inside your cottage, adding to the damp, unpleasant atmosphere. In the end, hygiene in medieval Europe, especially for a woman alone, is a losing battle. You do your best with inadequate resources, impossible social expectations, and a body that's constantly working against you. You're never clean enough, but you also can't try too hard to be clean. You smell bad, but so does everyone else. You have lice, but so does the Lord in his manor. It's a shared misery that somehow makes it both more bearable and more depressing. You're not failing at hygiene. The entire era is failing at hygiene. You're just experiencing it in particularly uncomfortable, isolated circumstances. What you wear isn't fashion. It's a uniform of survival and respectability. Your kirtle is made of rough wool or linen, dyed brown or grey because bright colours are expensive and draw attention. It's long-sleeved, high-necked, and designed to reveal absolutely nothing. Over it you wear an apron to protect the fabric from the daily assault of cooking, gardening and cleaning. Your head is covered, always. A simple coif or veil, because showing your hair is immodest and suggests availability. Loose hair is for maidens and prostitutes, and you can't afford to be mistaken for either. Your shoes, if you have them, are leather and falling apart. Most days you go barefoot to save them. Everything you own is patched, mended and remended. There's no such thing as a wardrobe. You wear the same thing every day until it disintegrates, and then you make it into rags and start over. Let's start with the basics. You own approximately 2 complete outfits, and that's if you're doing relatively well. One outfit is your good outfit, worn to church and any public occasions where you need to look respectable. The other is your everyday work outfit, already stained and worn but still functional. That's it. That's your entire wardrobe. There's no closet full of options, no seasonal rotation, no outfit planning. You wake up and put on whichever outfit isn't currently being washed or mended, which means you're wearing the same clothes for days, sometimes weeks at a time. The kirtle, your basic dress, is a simple design that hasn't changed much in generations. It's a long garment, ankle length, with long sleeves and a high neckline. The fabric is wool if you can afford it, because wool is warm and relatively durable. If you're poorer, it's rough linen, which is lighter, but offers less protection against cold. The wool is undyed or dyed with cheap natural dyes, brown from walnut hulls, grey from ash, dull yellow from onion skins. These colours aren't choices, they're what you can afford. Bright colours like red, blue or purple require expensive imported dyes, and are restricted by sumptuary laws anyway. Wearing colours above your station can actually get you fined. The construction is simple because it has to be. The kirtle is basically a long tube of fabric with holes for your head and arms, maybe gathered at the waist with a simple belt or cord. There are no buttons. Buttons are expensive, requiring metalwork or bone carving. Instead, you use ties, laces, or pins made from wood, bone, or cheap metal if you're lucky. The fit is loose because tight clothing requires more skill to make and more fabric to work with. Loose clothing also has the advantage of accommodating your body as it changes with seasons. Thinner in summer when food is scarce, slightly fuller in late fall after harvest. Under your kirtle you wear a shift, a long linen undergarment that's supposed to protect your outer clothing from your body's oils and sweat. This is your underwear, and it's the only thing that gets washed with any regularity because linen is easier to clean than wool and you can't afford to ruin your kirtle with frequent washing. The shift is thin, sleeveless or short-sleeved and falls to about knee length. It's also the garment you sleep in because you don't have pyjamas. You just never take the shift off. It's your base layer for everything. Over your kirtle, you wear an apron, a rectangular piece of rough fabric tied around your waist. The apron takes the brunt of your daily activities and gets splattered with cooking, stained with garden dirt, soaked when you wash laundry. It's sacrificial clothing, protecting the kirtle underneath from getting destroyed too quickly. When the apron becomes too stained or worn, you make a new one from scraps or old fabric. Nothing goes to waste. That old apron becomes rags for cleaning or patches for other garments. Your head covering is non-negotiable. Women's hair is associated with sexuality and must be covered in public. Loose flowing hair is for young unmarried girls, and even then only in certain contexts. For a woman alone, showing your hair would be scandalous. It suggests availability, immodesty, or worse. So you wear a coif, a simple cap made of linen that covers your hair completely, tied under your chin, or a veil, a rectangular piece of fabric draped over your head and sometimes pinned in place. These coverings aren't comfortable, especially in summer when they trap heat and make your scalp sweat. But comfort isn't the point. Modesty is. The head covering also serves a practical purpose. It keeps your hair relatively cleaner by protecting it from dirt, cooking smoke, and the elements. Since you wash your hair rarely, the covering helps contain the grease and the lice. It's not glamorous, but it's functional. Some women try to arrange their coifs or veils in ways that are at least neat, if not pretty. But you don't have time or resources for elaborate head dressings. Yours is simple, practical, slightly grimy, and constantly needing adjustment. Shoes are a luxury that you can't always afford to indulge. You own one pair, maybe. They're made of leather, simple turn shoes where the leather is sewn inside out and then turned right side out, creating a shoe with a seam on the inside. They're not shaped to left or right foot. They're identical and mould to your feet over time. They're not waterproof. They're not insulated. They offer minimal protection and fall apart with alarming speed because medieval leather working isn't sophisticated and you're walking on rough, often muddy or rocky ground. So you save your shoes. You go barefoot whenever possible, especially in summer or when you're just working around your cottage and garden. Your feet develop thick calluses that serve as natural shoes. They hurt when you step on sharp things, but pain is just part of life. In winter, shoes become more necessary, but even then you might wrap your feet in rags or old fabric scraps to save your actual shoes for church or market. Wet shoes are useless and take forever to dry, so trudging through snow or mud in your only pair isn't smart. Better to ruin rags than ruin the shoes you can't replace. Your cloak is your outerwear, and if you have one, you guard it carefully. It's a simple rectangular piece of wool, probably brown or grey, fastened at the neck with a pin or tied with a cord. In cold weather, you wrap it around yourself for warmth. In rain, it's your raincoat. Though wool doesn't repel water so much as absorb it slowly, so you end up wearing a heavy, damp blanket. The cloak also serves as a blanket for sleeping, as a ground cover when you sit outside, as an extra layer for your bed in winter. It's multi-purpose survival gear, and if you don't own one, winter is significantly more dangerous. Everything you own shows signs of repair. Patches cover holes, stitched on with whatever thread you have. Some garments have patches on patches, layers of repair that create a map of the garment's history. Hems are rehemmed multiple times as fabric frays. Seams are resewn when they split. You do this work yourself by firelight, squinting at stitches because you can't afford to replace anything. Each piece of clothing represents hours of labour. Someone grew the flax or raised the sheep. Someone spun the fibre into thread. Someone wove the thread into fabric. Someone sewed the fabric into a garment. You can't just throw that away because of a hole. You repair it until repair is impossible. When a garment finally becomes too damaged to wear, more hole than fabric, falling apart faster than you can mend it, it doesn't get thrown away. It becomes rags for cleaning, patches for other clothes, strips for bandages, or stuffing for your mattress. The fabric is used until it literally disintegrates into fibres. The medieval economy doesn't have room for waste, and you least of all can afford it. The layers you wear depend on the season. Winter means wearing everything you own at once. Your shift, your kirtle, maybe a second kirtle if you have one, your apron, your cloak, and possibly additional wraps or shawls made from scraps. You look bulky and shapeless, but you're slightly less cold. Summer means fewer layers, just the shift and kirtle. maybe not even the kirtle if you're working hard and can't stand the heat. But even in summer, you have to maintain modesty. You can't strip down to your shift in public without destroying your reputation, so you sweat and overheat and endure. Washing your clothes is a rare event, as previously discussed, but it bears repeating in the context of how few clothes you own. When you wash your one kirtle, you have to wear your other one or go without while it dries. If both need washing at the same time, you're in trouble. You time your laundry carefully, choosing warm, dry days when garments will dry relatively quickly. Even so, a wool kirtle can take a full day or more to dry, hanging from a rope or draped over bushes near your cottage. During that time, you're protective of it, checking frequently to make sure it hasn't blown away, hasn't been stolen, hasn't gotten dirty again. The social pressure around clothing is intense. You need to look modest and respectable, but not too nice. If your clothes are too clean or too well mended, people ask where you got them, or suspect you're receiving gifts from men. If your clothes are too dirty or too ragged, you're slovenly and immoral, unable to care for yourself properly. You need to hit the perfect middle ground of poor but respectable, and that line moves depending on who's judging you. Colour choices or lack thereof reinforce your social position. Bright colours, rich dyes, decorative trims, these signal wealth and status you don't have. Wearing them would be seen as presumptuous, possibly even illegal under sumptuary laws that restricted what each class could wear. So you stick to earth tones, brown, grey, undyed off-white. You blend into the dirt and the walls and the general dreariness of medieval poverty. You're not trying to stand out. You're trying to survive without drawing negative attention. There's no sense of personal style or self-expression through clothing. Your clothes aren't about you. They're about survival and social conformity. Everyone in your economic class dresses essentially the same way. There's a uniformity that's both comforting and depressing. Comforting because you're not singled out for your appearance. Depressing because there's no room for individuality or beauty. Fashion is for rich people who have the resources to waste on aesthetics. You have clothes that keep you alive and decent, and that has to be enough. Occasionally you might add a small personal touch, a bit of embroidery on your shift, a carefully mended tear that creates an interesting pattern, a coif tied in a way that's slightly different from others. These tiny gestures toward individuality are risky but psychologically necessary. You need to feel like a person, not just a collection of survival functions in drab clothing. So you take small rebellions where you can, knowing that they're almost invisible to others but meaningful to you. The life cycle of your clothing mirrors your own life. The garments wear out as you wear out. They age with you, accumulating damage and repair in parallel with your body accumulating scars and exhaustion. By the time you're old, if you make it that far, your clothes are ancient too, patched beyond recognition, held together by hope and thread. And when you die, your clothes will be stripped from your body and either taken by whoever finds you or redistributed to someone else who needs them. Because in medieval Europe, even death doesn't end a garment's usefulness. Someone else will wear your kirtle, your shift, your cloak, until they too fall apart and become rags. Let's talk about what no one mentions, the loneliness. Yes, your neighbours are watching you constantly, but that's not the same as companionship. You eat alone, you sleep alone, you work alone. There's no one to laugh with, to complain to share the small victories or the crushing defeats. Human beings aren't designed for this kind of isolation, but you don't have a choice. You can't risk getting too close to anyone because closeness invites questions, expectations and vulnerabilities you can't afford. Some women form quiet alliances, other widows, unmarried women, even prostitutes and outcasts. These friendships are lifelines, but they're also dangerous. If one of you falls under suspicion, the rest of you might too, so you keep your distance, even when your heart is screaming for connection. You become very good at talking to yourself, to your chickens, to God. And at night, when the fire dies and the darkness presses in, the loneliness becomes a physical thing, heavy and cold. The morning is when loneliness first announces itself. You wake in your cold cottage and there's no one else stirring. No husband groaning about his aching back. No children fighting over who has to fetch the water. No mother humming as she restarts the fire. Just you, silence, and the overwhelming knowledge that every single task of the day is yours alone to accomplish. There's no one to split the work with. No one to complain to when the fire won't catch. No one to commiserate with when your hands are too cold to function properly. Just you and the relentless list of things that must be done. Meals are particularly brutal. You sit on your wobbly stool with your bowl of pottage and there's no conversation. No sharing of news, no gossip, no gentle ribbing between siblings. You eat mechanically, tasting nothing, rushing through it, because sitting alone with food just emphasises how alone you are. Some women try to make mealtime pleasant. They arrange their single bowl carefully, say a prayer aloud to break the silence, pretend they're dining rather than just refueling. But mostly meals are just another task to complete before moving on to the next task. The lack of touch is its own form of torture. Humans need physical contact. We're wired for it. But you live in a world where touching is highly regulated, and as a woman alone, you're essentially untouchable. No one casually puts a hand on your shoulder. No one hugs you. No one holds your hand. The absence of touch makes you feel like a ghost. Present, but not quite real. You start craving it in strange ways. Sometimes you press your own hands together just to feel pressure, or you hug yourself, pretending for a moment that someone else is offering comfort. Your animals, if you have them, become emotional support in ways that would seem absurd to people who have human companionship. Your chickens have names. You talk to them like they're friends, narrating your day, asking their opinions on whether it'll rain. Your cat, if you're brave enough to keep one despite the witchcraft implications, becomes your closest companion. You sleep with it curled against you, the vibration of its purr the only comfort you receive. When the cat dies, as animals do, the grief is disproportionate because you haven't just lost a pet. You've lost your primary source of affection and non-judgmental company. Conversation with yourself becomes normal, then necessary, then constant. You narrate your actions aloud just to hear a voice, even if it's your own. Right, now I'll add water to the pot. Careful not to spill. There we go. It's not madness, though others might see it that way. It's survival. The sound of your own voice proves you still exist, that you haven't completely disappeared into the isolation. Some women sing to themselves, old songs learned in childhood, hymns from church, made-up melodies that pass the time. The singing fills the terrible silence. Prayer offers another outlet for the need to speak, to be heard. You pray constantly, not always from deep faith, but from desperate loneliness. God is someone to talk to who won't judge you for being alone, who won't gossip about you at the well. You have long, one-sided conversations with the Virgin Mary, pouring out your troubles, your fears, your aching loneliness. You pray to saints, asking for intercession, for comfort, for anything that makes you feel less alone. Whether anyone is listening doesn't always matter. The act of speaking your thoughts and feelings into the universe provides relief. The absence of shared joy is perhaps worst of all. When something good happens, your garden produces an unusually large cabbage, you finish a particularly nice piece of embroidery, you find a coin in the road, there's no one to tell. The happiness curdles immediately because it can't be shared. You try to hold on to it yourself, but joy seems to require witnesses to be real. Without someone to celebrate with you, even victories feel hollow. Conversely, when something terrible happens, you bear it alone. You cut your hand badly while chopping wood, and you have to clean and wrap it yourself while trying not to panic about infection. You wake up with a fever, and there's no one to fetch water, to put a cool cloth on your forehead, to sit with you so you're not afraid. You grieve losses, a chicken killed by a fox, an entire row of vegetables destroyed by blight, alone, and the grief has nowhere to go. It just sits inside you, accumulating with all the other griefs you've swallowed. Some women do form friendships, but they're careful, strategic alliances rather than the easy intimacy of true friendship. You might develop a relationship with another widow who lives nearby. You help each other occasionally, borrowing tools, trading goods, warning each other about suspicious characters or aggressive bailiffs. But you're both protective of your reputations, so the friendship has limits. You don't spend too much time together, you don't become too close. You maintain plausible deniability. We're just neighbours who occasionally help each other, nothing more. The outcasts form their own networks, women who've been accused of witchcraft but survived, women known to be prostitutes, women who've left abusive husbands and are technically fugitives. These women understand what it's like to live outside social approval, and sometimes they find solidarity in shared marginalization. But these friendships are dangerous. Being associated with known outcasts can destroy the fragile respectability you're trying to maintain. So even these connections are cautious, conducted in shadows, never acknowledged publicly. The village social events, weddings, feast days, celebrations, highlight your isolation rather than relieving it. You attend because not attending would be noticed and judged. But you're on the periphery, watching other people's joy from a distance. Families cluster together. Friends laugh and share food, couples dance, and you stand alone trying to look content, trying not to make your loneliness visible. Sometimes someone takes pity and speaks to you briefly, which is almost worse than being ignored because the pity is humiliating and the conversation is stilted. Both of you are aware that you're a charity case. Children's laughter becomes painful to hear. You watch them running through the village, playing games, being part of families, and the ache is physical. If you had children once, the pain is grief for what you've lost. If you never had children, it's grief for what you'll never have. Either way, their voices remind you that you're excluded from one of the most fundamental human experiences, being part of a family. The nights are when loneliness becomes unbearable. Darkness falls early for most of the year, and you're trapped in your cottage with nothing but your thoughts. The fire provides light and a focal point, something to stare at, but it doesn't provide company. You try to stay busy, mending by firelight, spinning, preparing tomorrow's food, but eventually you run out of tasks and there's nothing left but to sit in the flickering darkness and feel the weight of being alone. Sleep doesn't always bring relief. You dream of companionship, conversations with people you used to know, imaginary friends, scenarios where you're part of a community and loved. Then you wake up in your cold, dark cottage, alone, and the contrast between the dream and reality is crushing. Some mornings you lie there wishing you hadn't woken up, wishing you could stay in the dream where you weren't so terribly alone. The awareness that you could die and no one would know for days or weeks is terrifying. If you collapse in your cottage, who would check on you? Your neighbours might notice your chimney isn't smoking, but would they investigate immediately or just assume you're away? You could die of illness, injury, or simple misfortune, and your body could lie undiscovered until someone eventually noticed the smell or came looking for unpaid rent. There's something existentially horrifying about the possibility of dying alone and unmissed. Touch starvation manifests in physical symptoms. You become hypersensitive to the rare moments of accidental contact. Someone's hand brushing yours when exchanging coins at market, a bump in a crowd, even rough contact like being pushed aside. Your body craves these moments, even as your mind knows they're not really connection. You start understanding why the sick and dying sometimes improve slightly when someone sits with them, holds their hand. The human body needs touch to fully believe it's alive. Some women develop elaborate fantasy lives to cope with the loneliness. You imagine conversations with people who don't exist or who are far away. You create scenarios where you're not alone, where you have family and friends and a full life. These fantasies are dangerous because they make reality harder to bear, but they're also necessary. They're the pressure valve that keeps you from completely breaking under the weight of isolation. The judgment from others adds insult to injury. People assume that if you're alone, it's because something is wrong with you. You're unlovable, difficult, cursed, or morally defective. They don't understand, or don't care, that you're alone because of circumstances beyond your control. Their judgment makes the loneliness worse because it adds shame to isolation. You're not just alone, you're alone and it's supposedly your fault. The few moments of genuine human connection become precious beyond measure. A kind word from the baker, a sympathetic smile from another woman at the well, a priest who actually listens during confession rather than just lectures. These tiny interactions sustain you for days, replayed in your mind, analysed for every nuance of warmth or genuine care. You ration them like food, pulling them out in your darkest moments to prove that you're not completely invisible, that someone, somewhere, acknowledged your existence with kindness. But even those moments can't fill the fundamental void. Humans are social creatures. We need consistent, ongoing relationships to thrive, maybe even to survive in any meaningful way. You're living in a state of chronic social deprivation, and it affects everything. Your mood, your health, your ability to find joy in anything. The loneliness isn't just sad, it's corroding your humanity from the inside out. And yet, you keep going. You wake up each morning and face another day alone because the alternative is dying, and some stubborn part of you refuses to let loneliness be the thing that kills you. You talk to your chickens, you pray to unseen saints, you have imaginary conversations, and you endure. Because if nothing else, you're still here, still breathing, still refusing to disappear completely, even though sometimes it feels like the loneliness is trying to erase you entirely. The weight of the loneliness becomes part of your body, something you carry like your bones or your skin. It's always there, pressing down, making everything heavier and harder. And on the worst nights, when the fire has died to embers and the darkness is complete, you lie in your cold bed and wonder how much longer you can carry this weight before it crushes you entirely. Getting sick when you're alone is terrifying because there's no one to care for you. If you collapse, you might lie there for days before someone checks. If you have a fever, you treat it yourself with whatever herbs you know, willow bark for pain, chamomile for sleep, garlic for everything else. You've probably learned some folk medicine from other women, passed down in whispers because the church doesn't love the idea of women healing without male oversight. But you don't have access to physicians. They're expensive and mostly useless anyway, but at least they lend legitimacy. You're stuck with what you can grow, barter for, or remember from when your mother was alive. Childbirth, if you're a young widow, is a nightmare. Pregnancy alone is dangerous. Labour without help is often fatal. If you survive, you're expected to be back on your feet immediately because there's no such thing as maternity leave. And if you don't survive, well, they'll say it was God's will and rent your cottage to someone else. Let's start with the terrifying reality. You're your own healthcare system. There are no emergency services, no hospitals, no medical insurance. When something goes wrong with your body, and in medieval Europe things go wrong constantly, you have three options: treat yourself, pray, or die. Sometimes all three happen simultaneously. The knowledge you possess is cobbled together from observation, from older women who taught you before they died, from trial and error that sometimes worked and sometimes made things worse. You know that willow bark tea helps with headaches and fever because it contains what we now know as salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin. But you don't know why it works, you just know that it does, usually if you prepare it right and the willow bark is fresh enough. Your herb garden is your pharmacy. Chamomile for calming nerves and helping you sleep when pain or worry keeps you awake. Sage for digestive troubles and sore throats. Mint for nausea and stomach upset. Lavender for headaches and to promote healing. Yarrow to stop bleeding from cuts. You pack it into wounds and hope infection doesn't set in. Garlic for everything. Colds, coughs, infections, general unwellness. Medieval people believed garlic had almost magical properties, and while they didn't understand antibacterial effects, they weren't entirely wrong. You hang garlic braids in your cottage and eat it regularly, enduring the smell because survival matters more than pleasant breath. Common injuries are part of life. You cut yourself while chopping wood, preparing food or handling tools. Minor cuts you clean with water, ideally boiled and cooled, though you don't always have the fuel to spare, and pack with herbs. You bind them with strips of cloth torn from old garments. You watch carefully for signs of infection. Redness, heat, swelling, the telltale red lines spreading from the wound that mean blood poisoning. If infection sets in, you have limited options. More herbs, more prayer, and the grim knowledge that people die from infected cuts all the time. A scratch from a thorn can kill you if luck isn't on your side. Burns from cooking fires are constant. You scold yourself with boiling water, burn your fingers on hot pots, lean too close to the fire and singe your clothes or skin. For burns, you might use honey if you have any. It's expensive, but genuinely helps prevent infection and promotes healing. Or you use cool water, herbal poultices, and prayers to Saint Lawrence, the patron saint of cooks who was martyred on a gridiron and presumably understands burns. Fevers are particularly frightening when you're alone. You wake up shivering despite being under every cover you own, your body alternating between chills and sweating. Your head pounds, your vision blurs. You drag yourself to your store of willow bark and make tea with shaking hands, spilling as much as you manage to drink. You lie on your straw mattress, alone, wondering if this is the illness that will kill you. No one will check on you unless they notice your chimney isn't smoking. By the time they investigate, you could be days into the fever. delirious, unable to help yourself. Respiratory illnesses, coughs, congestion, what we'd call bronchitis or pneumonia, are common and deadly. The damp, drafty cottage doesn't help. Smoke from the fire irritates your lungs constantly. You treat respiratory problems with steam if you can boil water, breathing in the vapour to loosen congestion. You make teas from horehound, coltsfoot or thyme. You rub your chest with animal fat mixed with herbs. You pray you don't develop the deep rattling cough that signals serious lung infection, because once it settles in your chest, your chances of survival drop dramatically. Digestive problems are endemic. Spoiled food, contaminated water, parasites. Your gut is under constant assault. You treat diarrhea with binding foods like bread soaked in water, avoiding the dehydration that kills people, especially children. For constipation, you eat what fibre you can find or use herbal laxatives made from dandelion or other plants. Stomach pain gets treated with mint, ginger, if you can somehow afford it, or just pressing a hot cloth to your belly and enduring. Toothaches, as mentioned earlier, are excruciating and untreatable. You pack the cavity with clove oil if you have it, which numbs the pain temporarily. You hold warm cloths to your face. You drink strong alcohol if you can get it, trying to numb yourself from the inside. But mostly you suffer, day after day, the throbbing pain radiating through your jaw and skull, making it impossible to eat, sleep, or think clearly. If the tooth obsesses, you're facing potential sepsis with no antibiotics, just your immune system and luck. Menstrual problems add another layer. Painful cramps, irregular cycles, excessive bleeding, these aren't just inconveniences but genuine health concerns. You treat cramps with heat, heated stones wrapped in cloth held against your abdomen, and teas made from herbs like mugwort or raspberry leaf. If your cycle stops unexpectedly and you're not pregnant, it's probably malnutrition. Your body has shut down non-essential functions because you don't have enough food. It's your body's way of saying survival takes priority over fertility. Pregnancy, if it happens, is a death sentence for many women. You might be pregnant from your late husband, from rape, or from a brief relationship you tried to keep secret. Regardless of how it happened, you're now facing 9 months of increasing vulnerability, followed by one of the most dangerous events a medieval woman experiences: childbirth. Prenatal care doesn't exist. You work as long as your body allows, which is usually until labour starts. You try to eat well, but malnutrition during pregnancy is common. You feel the baby move and hope it's healthy, knowing that birth defects, stillbirths and complications are frighteningly common. When labour begins, you're in desperate need of help. Childbirth alone is incredibly dangerous. You can't see what you're doing, can't reach properly, can't handle complications. Ideally, you have a midwife, a woman experienced in births who can guide you through it. But midwives cost money you might not have, or your reputation might be so damaged that the local midwife refuses to help. Some women give birth utterly alone, squatting in their cottages, biting down on cloth to muffle their screams, reaching down to catch their own babies. The pain is indescribable. The fear is overwhelming. And the knowledge that you or the baby or both might die is inescapable. Complications during birth are often fatal. Breech presentation, where the baby is positioned wrong. Placental problems, hemorrhaging. Obstructed labour, where the baby simply won't come out and there's no surgical intervention available. Women labour for days sometimes, exhausting themselves, often dying from the exertion or blood loss or infection that follows. If you survive the birth, you're immediately dealing with a newborn, still bleeding, still in pain, with no recovery period. You have to feed the baby, feed yourself, keep the cottage running, all while your body tries to heal from trauma. Infant mortality is staggering. Roughly 1/3 of babies die before their first birthday. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, mysterious sudden deaths. Babies are fragile. And medieval conditions are hostile. As a mother alone, you have no support system. If the baby won't stop crying, you walk the floor alone, exhausted and despairing. If the baby gets sick, you try your herbal remedies and pray, knowing that most childhood illnesses are beyond your ability to treat. If the baby dies, you bury it yourself in the churchyard if the priest allows it, or in a corner of your garden if he doesn't, and you grieve alone because grief, like everything else, is your solitary burden. Mental health problems, though not understood as such, are common and untreated. The grinding poverty, loneliness, fear, and physical pain take psychological tolls. You experience what we'd call depression, the inability to find joy in anything, the crushing fatigue that goes beyond physical tiredness, the sense that nothing matters and nothing will ever improve. You might experience anxiety, constant worry about survival, hypervigilance about threats, panic attacks when stress becomes overwhelming. But there's no therapy, no medication, no understanding that these are treatable conditions. You're just told to pray more, work harder, trust in God's plan. Some women experience what medieval people called melancholy, what we might recognise as severe clinical depression. You stop eating because food has no taste and the effort isn't worth it. You stop caring for yourself. You stop leaving your cottage. The world narrows to the walls around you and the dark thoughts in your head. Sometimes women in this state simply lie down and die, not from any specific illness, but from giving up. The community might say they died of grief or a broken heart, and in a way they're right. Disabilities from injury or illness are permanent and unaccommodated. If you injure your back and it doesn't heal properly, you live with chronic pain and reduced mobility for the rest of your life. If you lose an eye to infection or injury, you adapt to impaired vision with no corrective options. If you break a bone and it heals wrong, you limp or have a twisted arm forever. The body doesn't recover the way it might with modern medical intervention. Damage is often permanent, and you adjust your life around your reduced capabilities, or you die from being unable to work. The psychological burden of being your own healthcare provider is immense. Every symptom requires interpretation. Is this illness serious or minor? Is it getting worse or better? Should you try to push through or rest? Rest means not working, which means not earning, which means not eating. So you almost always push through, working while sick, ignoring pain until it's incapacitating. This often makes conditions worse, turning minor illnesses into major ones, but you don't have the luxury of preventive care or early intervention. The line between helpful folk remedies and dangerous pseudoscience is thin and constantly shifting. Some of what you know is genuinely useful. Herbs with actual medicinal properties, wound care techniques that help prevent infection, dietary strategies that address deficiencies. But some of it is superstition or worse. Bloodletting, though more common among those who can afford barber surgeons, is believed to cure many ailments and actually weakens patients. Poultices made from dung or other filth are applied to wounds with the best intentions but often introduce infection. You do what you've been taught, what seems to work, what other women swear by, and you hope you're helping rather than hurting. The ever-present fear is that your body will fail catastrophically and suddenly. A stroke, a heart attack, a seizure, an internal rupture. Any of these can happen without warning, and if you're alone, they're almost certainly fatal. You worry about this as you age, feeling your body becoming less reliable, noticing new pains and weaknesses. Every unusual symptom could be the beginning of the end, and you have no way to know until it's too late. In the end, medieval healthcare for a woman alone is about damage control, not healing. You're trying to minimize harm, manage pain, and survive day by day with the knowledge that at any moment your body could betray you in ways you can't fix. You're a healer without training, a patient without options, and a survivor on borrowed time, using herbs, prayer, and sheer stubbornness to stay alive in a world that seems designed to kill you. Here's a grim truth. You're vulnerable. A woman alone is an easy target for theft, assault, and worse. You have no husband to defend you, no brothers to avenge you, no father to demand justice. The law is mostly useless. If you're attacked, you can report it, but good luck getting anyone to care. They'll ask what you were doing alone, what you were wearing, whether you invited it somehow. Because a woman without a man is assumed to be sexually available, morally questionable, or outright asking for trouble. So you lock your door at night, if you have a lock. You keep a knife nearby, though using it might get you accused of murder. You avoid travelling after dark, walking alone, or making eye contact with groups of men. You make yourself small, invisible, unthreatening. And even then, it's not enough. Some women are raped and never tell anyone because the shame and the accusations would destroy what little life they have left. Some are robbed, and lose everything. Some simply disappear, and no one investigates because who's going to advocate for a woman with no family? Let's start with the most basic level of vulnerability. Your home. That cottage on the edge of the village with its wattle and daub walls and wooden door isn't a fortress. It's barely an obstacle. The door is held shut by a simple wooden latch. Maybe a bar you can drop across it from the inside. If you're lucky, you have a crude lock, a metal mechanism that requires a large iron key. But locks are expensive, and most women living alone can't afford them. Even if you have one, a determined intruder can break through your thin walls or simply kick the door in. The wood is old, the hinges are weak, and you have no reinforcements. At night, you lie in your bed listening to every sound. The wind howling becomes footsteps. The creak of wood settling becomes someone testing your door. You've wedged your stool against the door as an early warning system. If someone enters, it'll scrape across the floor and wake you. Maybe. If you wake up fast enough. If they don't just walk in quietly and stand over your bed before you realise you're not alone. The scenarios play out in your mind constantly. What would you do? Scream. In a village where people mind their own business, and you're already considered problematic, would anyone come? Fight? With what? Your kitchen knife is within reach, but using it effectively against someone larger and stronger is optimistic at best. Theft is a constant threat. You own almost nothing, but what you have is essential for survival. Your cooking pot, your spinning wheel, your few tools, the small amount of food you've stored. Losing any of it could mean the difference between survival and starvation. Thieves know that women alone are easy targets. No husband sleeping lightly, ready to defend his property. No sons who might fight back. Just you and your cottage full of things that might be worth stealing. Some thefts are opportunistic. Someone noticing your door is open while you're in the garden and quickly grabbing something. Others are calculated, thieves watching your routine, knowing when you're most vulnerable. If you are robbed, reporting it accomplishes almost nothing. You'd go to the local bailiff or reeve, and they'd ask you questions that reveal their assumptions. Was your door locked? If no, then clearly you were careless and partially responsible. Are you certain you didn't misplace the item? Because women are forgetful and hysterical, obviously. Do you have any witnesses? Of course you don't. You live alone. What was the value of the stolen goods? Whatever you say will be dismissed as exaggeration, because women always overestimate, don't they? Even if authorities believe you, recovering stolen goods is unlikely. They have limited resources and no interest in helping a woman who can't pay for their services or whose family won't make trouble if she's ignored. Your stolen possessions are gone. You've lost not just objects, but the time, money and labour that went into acquiring them. You're set back weeks or months in your survival efforts, and there's no compensation, no justice, no resolution. Sexual violence is the ever-present shadow over your existence. As a woman without male protection, you're seen as available, unguarded property. The threat comes from everywhere. Neighbours who've decided you owe them something, travellers passing through who see an isolated cottage, even local officials who have power over you and know you can't effectively resist. The rape of a woman alone is disturbingly common and disturbingly tolerated. It's treated as less serious than the rape of a respectable woman, a wife, a daughter under her father's protection, a virgin whose value is tied to her chastity. If you're raped, reporting it is a nightmare. The legal process, such as it exists, is designed to doubt you. You have to raise the hue and cry immediately after the assault, gather witnesses while you're still traumatized, bleeding, terrified. You have to show physical evidence of resistance. Bruises, torn clothes, signs of a struggle. If you froze in fear, if you submitted to avoid being murdered, if you tried to negotiate your survival, that's interpreted as consent. You're asked what you were doing, what you were wearing, whether you've had sexual relations before. Your entire character is scrutinized and found wanting because you're a woman alone, which already marks you as morally suspect. The man who raped you, if he's caught and accused, has advantages you don't. He can testify in his own defense. He can bring male witnesses to vouch for his character. He can argue that you consented, that you're lying, that you're trying to trap him or extort him. If he has any social standing whatsoever, if he's married, if he owns property, if he's known in the community, His word carries more weight than yours. The outcome is often that nothing happens to him, or he pays a small fine, while your reputation is destroyed and your life in the village becomes impossible. Many women never report sexual assault because they know the process will re-victimize them and accomplish nothing. They live with the trauma silently, adding it to the pile of suffering they're expected to endure. The rape becomes another secret, another weight carried in silence. It affects everything: your ability to trust, to feel safe, to move through the world without hypervigilance. But you can't talk about it without risking blame, shame, and further marginalization. Physical assault short of rape is also common and similarly unpunished. Someone decides you've wronged them. You refused to sell them something at their price. You spoke back to them. You looked at them wrong, and they hit you, shove you, throw something at you. If you're injured, you treat yourself because who else will help? If you complain, you're told you probably provoked it. Women are supposed to be meek and submissive. If someone felt compelled to strike you, clearly you deserved it. The threat of violence shapes your entire existence. You modify your behavior constantly to minimize risk. You don't make eye contact with men who seem drunk or aggressive. You don't walk past groups of men if you can avoid it. If you must, you walk quickly, eyes down, making yourself as small and unnoticeable as possible. You never go out after dark unless it's absolutely unavoidable. Travelling at night as a woman alone is practically asking to be attacked. You don't go to taverns, even though that's where news is exchanged and deals are made, because taverns are male spaces and your presence would be interpreted as availability. You don't argue or stand up for yourself too forcefully when dealing with men, even when they're cheating you or treating you unfairly. The satisfaction of calling out injustice isn't worth the risk that they'll respond with violence. You've learned to swallow your pride, accept unfair treatment, and move on because survival requires avoiding conflict. Every interaction is a calculation of risk versus reward. Some women try to create safety through strategic relationships. You might have an informal understanding with a neighbour, a man who's married and respectable, where he keeps an eye on your cottage in exchange for some of your labour or goods. It's protection of a sort, though it comes with its own risks. If his interest becomes less neighbourly and more predatory, you're in a worse position than before. If his wife becomes jealous or suspicious, she can make your life miserable. But the alternative, no protection at all, seems worse. Weapons are complicated. You probably have a knife for cooking and work. Legally, you're allowed to carry reasonable tools. But using a weapon in self-defense as a woman can backfire catastrophically. If you stab someone who breaks into your cottage, even in clear self-defense, you could be accused of murder. Your word against his, or his family's, and you're a woman alone with a reputation for strangeness. The legal system might decide you lured him in and killed him for his money, or that you're a violent, dangerous woman who deserves punishment. The same act that would be considered justified self-defense if performed by a man becomes evidence of your depravity. Some women develop reputations for being difficult or mean as a protective strategy. If you're known to be sharp-tongued, quick to anger, possibly a bit crazy, some men might avoid you. It's not much protection, but it's something. The downside is that it further isolates you and feeds into the narrative that you're an unnatural woman who deserves whatever happens to you. But you might decide that isolation is preferable to being seen as an easy target. The travelling required for market or errands is particularly dangerous. Roads between villages aren't patrolled. Bandits, vagrants, and opportunistic criminals know that travellers carry goods or money. A woman travelling alone is an ideal target. Unlikely to be able to fight back effectively, unlikely to be missed quickly if she disappears. You try to travel with others when possible, joining groups going the same direction. But this isn't always feasible, and sometimes you have no choice but to walk alone, heart pounding, jumping at every sound, praying you'll make it to your destination. The bailiffs and reeves who collect taxes and enforce local laws are themselves threats. They have power over you and limited oversight. Some are honest men trying to do their jobs. Others are predators who use their positions to extort, abuse, or assault women who can't fight back. When the bailiff comes to collect your rent or taxes, you're alone with a man who has authority and knows you have no male relatives to protect you. If he demands additional payment in the form of sexual favours, what are your options? Refuse and risk eviction, increased fines, or false accusations? Submit and live with the trauma and shame? There are no good choices. The casual violence of medieval life, public beatings, executions, brawls, creates an atmosphere where violence is normalized. People are desensitized to suffering. The sight of someone being whipped or put in the stocks is entertainment, a warning, a part of regular life. In this context, violence against a marginal woman barely registers. It's not shocking or scandalous. It's just another day, another example of someone getting what was probably coming to them. Sometimes women simply vanish. They're last seen walking toward the forest to gather firewood, or heading to the next village for market, and they never return. No body is found, or if one is, it's weeks later, too decomposed to determine cause of death. No investigation is launched because there's no family demanding one, no influential person who cares. The woman becomes a cautionary tale. Remember what happened to her? That's why women shouldn't live alone. The victim gets blamed for her own disappearance, and nothing changes. The psychological toll of constant threat is exhausting. You're never fully relaxed, never fully safe. Part of your mind is always alert, scanning for danger, calculating exits, preparing for violence. This hypervigilance wears you down over time. You become jumpy, paranoid, unable to trust anyone. Sleep is difficult because letting your guard down feels dangerous. You exist in a state of chronic stress that damages your health and your mental well-being. And perhaps worst of all is the knowledge that this is just how things are. This isn't an aberration or a temporary problem. This is the permanent condition of being a woman alone in medieval Europe. The violence, the threat, the lack of recourse, these are features of your existence, not bugs. You can't fix the system or change the culture. You can only navigate it as carefully as possible and hope that luck is on your side more often than it isn't. If you're truly desperate, the community might help you. Might. Churches sometimes distribute alms to the deserving poor, which is code for people who grovel appropriately and don't complain. You might get a loaf of bread, some watered-down soup, or a few coins, but it comes with conditions. You have to prove you're pious, obedient, and grateful. You have to sit through sermons about how poverty is God's test and your suffering is building character. You have to endure the pitying looks and the whispered comments about how you should have remarried, should have been more careful, should have made better choices. The charity isn't given out of kindness. It's given to maintain social order, to keep you from stealing or starving in a way that makes other people uncomfortable, and you take it because you have to, even though it tastes like shame. The process of seeking charity begins with the recognition that you've failed. You've failed to provide for yourself, failed to maintain independence, failed at the fundamental task of survival. This failure is both practical, you literally don't have enough food or money, and moral in the eyes of a medieval society. The fact that you need help proves something is wrong with you. Maybe you're lazy, maybe you've sinned and God is punishing you. Maybe you're just fundamentally inadequate as a person. The charity system is built on these assumptions, and every interaction reinforces them. The church is the primary source of organised charity, and churches collect tithes specifically for distribution to the poor. But the poor is a carefully curated category. There are deserving poor and undeserving poor, and the distinction is entirely about behaviour and perceived morality, not actual need. The deserving poor are elderly, sick, or disabled through no fault of their own. They're humble, grateful, and visibly suffering in ways that inspire pity rather than disgust. The undeserving poor are able-bodied adults who should be working, people with moral failings, anyone who seems too comfortable with poverty. As a woman alone, you're automatically suspect. Why aren't you married? Why don't you have family? What did you do to end up in this position? Alms distribution happens on specific days, often after Mass. You have to attend the service, sitting or standing with the other poor people in a designated area that separates you from the respectable parishioners. The priest's sermon often addresses poverty, framing it as a spiritual test or a consequence of sin. He reminds you that Jesus said the poor will always be with us, implying that your poverty is ordained by God, and trying to escape it might be resisting divine will. He emphasizes the virtue of patience, of accepting your lot, of being grateful for whatever crumbs fall from the table of the wealthy. After the service, you join the line of supplicants outside the church. The line is visible to everyone leaving Mass, which means your poverty is on public display. Wealthier parishioners walk past, some looking sympathetic, others judgmental, a few ostentatiously dropping coins into the collection as they go, performing their own virtue. You stand there, hungry and cold, watching them in their better clothes, well fed and comfortable, knowing they're going home to full tables while you're hoping for scraps. When you reach the front of the line, you face whoever is distributing alms, often the priest, sometimes a church official, or a wealthy patron who's funding the charity. They assess you with their eyes, taking in your appearance, your clothes, your level of desperation. They ask questions. How did you come to be in need? What family do you have? Are you working? Why isn't it enough? Each question is an interrogation of your character. The right answers demonstrate that you're trying hard, but circumstances beyond your control have overwhelmed you. The wrong answers suggest you're lazy, morally corrupt, or attempting to defraud the charity system. You receive your allocation, a small loaf of bread, perhaps a bowl of thin soup ladled from a large pot, maybe a few coins if you're particularly fortunate or particularly pitiful. The amount is never generous. It's calculated to keep you alive but not comfortable, to supplement your income but not replace the need to work. The theology behind this is that charity shouldn't encourage dependency or laziness. You should still feel the pressure of poverty motivating you to work harder, pray more, improve yourself. The fact that you're already working as hard as you can and it's still not enough doesn't factor into their calculations. With your bread or soup, you're expected to express gratitude. Not just a simple thank you, but profound, elaborate thanks. You praise the generosity of the church, the kindness of the donor, the mercy of God. You promise to pray for them. You assure them you don't take this for granted. The gratitude performance is mandatory, and if you seem insufficiently grateful, if you're too proud, too matter-of-fact, or heaven forbid, if you ask for more, you risk being cut off entirely. Beggars can't be choosers, as the saying goes, and they certainly can't be dignified. Some churches require additional performances of piety in exchange for charity. You might have to say specific prayers, attend extra services, or perform penance. One church might require you to kneel on the stone floor and recite Hail Marys while the congregation watches. Another might have you publicly confess your sins as a condition of receiving help. These rituals serve multiple purposes. They demonstrate your submission to religious authority. They provide edifying spectacles for the faithful, and they ensure that charity is sufficiently humiliating that people will avoid it unless truly desperate. Private charity from wealthy individuals is sometimes available, but it comes with its own complications. A noble lady might decide to sponsor a poor woman as an act of Christian virtue. She'll provide food, sometimes clothing or money, occasionally employment. In exchange, you become her charity project. She shows you off to her friends as evidence of her piety and generosity. You're expected to be endlessly grateful, to demonstrate visible improvement in your circumstances, to validate her investment. If you remain poor and struggling despite her help, it reflects badly on her judgment in choosing you, and the help will stop. These wealthy benefactors often have specific ideas about how you should live. They might dictate how you spend the money they give you, what work you should do, even how you should dress. They see charity as an opportunity to reform the poor, to teach you proper values and behaviours. If you don't improve according to their standards, they lose interest. You're not a person with complex circumstances. You're a project that's either succeeding or failing. Communal charity, neighbours helping each other informally, exists but is unpredictable. In tight-knit communities, when disaster strikes someone known and liked, people rally. They bring food, offer temporary shelter, help with work. But if you're already marginalised, already viewed with suspicion, this informal support network doesn't extend to you. Your neighbours watch you struggle and tell themselves it's not their problem. If they do help, it's grudging and conditional. They'll loan you something and remind you constantly that you owe them. They'll give you food and expect repayment in labour or goods you can't afford. The distinction between charity and loan is often deliberately blurred. Someone gives you bread and later claims it was a loan that you need to repay with interest. You accepted it thinking it was help, but now you're in debt. This isn't accidental. It's a way of keeping poor people trapped in cycles of obligation and dependency. You need help, you accept it, and then you're held hostage by the debt. Refusing help because you suspect it comes with strings means going without, which might not be survivable. There are also mutual aid societies or confraternities, groups that pool resources to help members in need. But membership requires fees or regular contributions that you can't afford. These organisations help their own, and if you're not in the club, you're out of luck. The very people who most need communal support are excluded from the systems designed to provide it because they can't afford the entry cost. Some forms of charity are deliberately designed to be degrading. In certain towns, the poor were required to wear specific clothing or badges identifying them as charity recipients. The visible marking served as public shame. Everyone who saw you knew you were dependent on others. It was meant to motivate you to escape poverty through hard work, but mostly it just added humiliation to hardship. The psychological cost of accepting charity is severe. Every time you stand in that line, you internalize the message that you're inadequate, that your existence is a burden others must bear, that you failed at the basic human task of self-sufficiency. The gratitude you're forced to perform, over and over, erodes your sense of self-worth. You start believing the narrative that you deserve your poverty, that you're weak or sinful or broken. The shame becomes part of your identity. And there's the bitter awareness that the system of charity exists not to genuinely help you, but to maintain order. The wealthy and the church don't want you to starve in the streets where everyone can see, creating disorder and raising uncomfortable questions about social inequality. They want you to survive quietly, to remain poor but not visibly dying, to accept your place without causing trouble. Charity keeps you alive enough to not be a problem while ensuring you stay subordinate and grateful. Some women tried to maintain dignity while accepting charity by mentally separating themselves from the experience. You tell yourself you're just doing what's necessary to survive, that accepting help doesn't define who you are. You perform the gratitude while privately resenting it. You take the bread while promising yourself that someday you won't need it. These mental strategies help preserve sanity, but they don't eliminate the fundamental humiliation. Others tried to refuse charity even when desperate, preserving pride at the cost of physical suffering. Going hungry feels less degrading than standing in that line. Wearing rags feels better than wearing clothing marked as charity. There's a calculation. Which is worse, the physical deprivation or the psychological damage of accepting help on these terms? Different women make different choices, and neither choice is wrong. Both are just different strategies for surviving an impossible situation. The worst part might be watching charity go to others based on arbitrary factors. Someone more attractive gets more help because benefactors prefer helping pretty people. Someone with a more sympathetic story, a widow with young children, a woman recently fallen from higher status, receives generosity while you're overlooked. Someone who's better at performing gratitude and piety gets more than someone who's genuinely needier but less skilled at the performance. The system isn't based on need. It's based on worthiness, as defined by those in power, and the criteria are subjective and unfair, and through it all you're aware that the people helping you are often the same people who benefit from systems that keep you poor. The church that gives you a loaf of bread collected that bread as a tithe from peasants who could barely afford it. The wealthy lady who sponsors you made her money from rents charged to the poor. The charity system exists because the economic system creates poverty, and the people administering charity have a stake in maintaining that economic system. They're not trying to eliminate poverty, they're managing it, making it survivable enough that poor people don't revolt, but not comfortable enough that they stop working for poverty wages. You eat your charity bread, and it sits heavy in your stomach, made of grain and shame in equal measure. You wear your charity cloak, and it feels like a uniform declaring your failure. You spend your charity coins, and each one is a small surrender of dignity. But you survive. Day by day, humiliation by humiliation, you survive. Because in medieval Europe, for a woman alone, survival often means swallowing pride along with whatever scraps the community deigns to throw your way. So, how was your day as a woman living alone in medieval Europe? You woke up cold and stayed cold. You worked until your body screamed. You ate food that barely qualified as food. You endured surveillance, suspicion, and the constant threat of violence. You swallowed your pride to accept charity that came wrapped in judgment. You faced illness without help, loneliness without comfort, and the knowledge that winter might kill you quietly while no one noticed. And yet, somehow, women survived this. Not all of them. Many didn't make it. But enough did. Enough to leave traces in tax records, court documents, and the occasional sympathetic mention in a letter or diary. They were widows who refused to remarry despite the pressure, spinsters who carved out lives on the margins, runaways who chose uncertain freedom over certain abuse, women whose names we'll never know but whose stubbornness echoes across centuries. These women weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They didn't lead armies or write philosophy or build cathedrals. They just refused to disappear. They spun thread by candlelight, patched their threadbare clothes one more time, scraped together enough food to see another day, and kept going when everything, the law, the church, the economy, their neighbours, was designed to break them. They lived in a world that told them they shouldn't exist without men, and they existed anyway. They survived on the edges of society, in drafty cottages and suspicious silences, proving every single day that women were more capable, more resilient, and more independent than medieval culture wanted to admit. The system tried to erase them, and for the most part it succeeded. But not completely. Never completely. So tonight, as you settle into your bed with its clean sheets and central heating, as you drink water from a tap and take for granted that tomorrow you'll eat 3 meals without wondering where they'll come from, maybe spare a thought for the women who survived medieval Europe alone, the ones who woke up every morning knowing the world wanted them to fail and decided to survive anyway, one stubborn day at a time. They didn't have safety, comfort, or justice. They didn't have voices loud enough to reach us across the centuries, but they had something that couldn't be taken away, the absolute refusal to give up, to lie down, to accept that their existence was invalid just because it didn't fit inside the neat little boxes society had prepared for women. And in that refusal, in that quiet, unglamorous persistence, they were revolutionaries. Not the kind who get statues or chapters in history books, but the kind who kept the thread of female independence alive through the darkest periods of history, passing it down until eventually, slowly, painfully, things began to change. You wouldn't have survived their world. Most of us wouldn't, but they did, and we're here because of their stubborn, impossible survival. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in comfort they couldn't imagine, remember them. The women history tried to forget, who lived alone, worked alone, suffered alone, and somehow, against every odd, refused to be erased completely. Their names are lost, their stories are fragments, but their courage, that unwitnessed, unrewarded courage of simply continuing to exist when everything was against them, that's still here. In every woman who's ever had to fight for independence, for autonomy, for the right to exist on her own terms. The medieval women who lived alone didn't win. Not really. But they also didn't lose completely. And sometimes, in history's cruelest chapters, not losing completely is the only victory possible. Rest well. You're safe, warm, and free in ways they never were. And that matters. That's what they would have wanted. For someone. Somewhere, someday, to have it better than they did. Good night.